Thank you for downloading the book in the free electronic library royallib.ru, http://royallib.ru. All books by the author, http://royallib.ru/author/Pavlov_Oleg.html. The same book in other formats, http://royallib.ru/book/Pavlov_Oleg/Karagandinsky_deviatiny.html. Enjoy reading. Oleg Pavlov. Karaganda deviatiny. Being. In the wind and cold, watermelons were still traded in the city, and Karaganda floated and floated on the steppe winds into the coming winter. Every morning the clouds shyly scattered, climbing out of the night as if from cracks onto callous star crumbs. The widescreen black and white sky of November was opening up. The cold came out of the block of stone of the day and wandered gloomily through the streets, avenues, squares, on the expanses of which the waves of the winds shook the rafts of the same reddened rows of trees. The regiment of prison camp guards switched to winter time, as it always happened, at the time established by the standard, by order. The escorts, the guards in good overcoats, were getting used to their underwear. Only those who were undergoing treatment in the regimental infirmary stubbornly expected the onset of each new day. The inhabitants of the infirmary rarely made a noise louder than a mouse. The souls here were quiet, medicinal. It was loud from the mice, eternally gluttonous, grey ubiquitous creatures that migrated to the cold from the garden, where they harvested the entire crop, into the underground and into the piers of this barrack-like building, fateful, however, for them too. The mice in the infirmary entertained, and even consoled, making cordial friendship whenever you want and with whom you want, if you were invited to be friends even with a crust of bread. They were born right there, somewhere under the floor and in the piers, but rarely fell into the eyes in the form of corpses, unless the eyes of the one who, with the passion of a hunter, exterminated them day after day, the head of the medical unit, a man with a seemingly foreign surname, painfully hating all living things that made at least some independent sound in this building. The mice in the infirmary ate so many different medicines as if they were sick all at once, but also in reserve, so as not to get sick someday later. Only one analgin they ate several bags a year. From pills, mice either got brave to the point of stupor, then grew smarter, becoming mathematicians, but only they didn't die, because all medicines were once tested on them, on mice, before getting a ticket to industrial production. A man by the name of Institutov was also aware of this. They were the only ones who could say something to this doctor in uniform, walking around the infirmary as if they were free. The head of the medical unit was not a forced servant either by temperament or spirit. Serve once recruited as a dental technician, having an education above average, which greatly distinguished himself from other people, and when it seemed to him that it was time to remind who they were dealing with, he said impressively, "I, as a person with an education above average." Like any civilian, he was promoted to a junior officer rank for uniformity and evenness of the ranks. Institutov did not have to achieve a vulgar promotion through his work or talents. When the former chief medical officer irrevocably drank himself, a teetotaler dentist was appointed head of the infirmary, a man of medium height, with a neatly trimmed mustache, matte skin and arms that were short and inconspicuous, but overgrown with muscles with the help of almost everyday strength exercises. Institutov squeamishly, and even timidly, could not stand simplicity in anything, therefore exercises with a kettlebell, for example, were called kettlebell lifting, and if he made a simple injection, then this became an outpatient procedure. Although there was something prudish in the whole figure of the tooth-puller, he himself tried to emphasize his grace, beauty, but only natural blacks breathed beauty and strength, sparkling, like anthracite, the eyes of a teetotaler. Either they suddenly shrank from resentment and anger as small imps, then two well-groomed, round, magnificent demons majestically floated up from the bottom of them, if the commander was pleased with everything and rested as if on his laurels. Institutov had a habit of judging people, likening their personality to heroes of literary works, even not necessarily negative ones, when indignant. No person was news to him. He seemed to say this with irritation, "There were such before you." This did not mean that he had read or seen much in his life. However, he had an idea. The head of the medical unit did not tolerate alcohol. It seemed that the sobriety of life was one of his main principles, even, perhaps, moral ones. He was an ulcer, but he hid it because he was ashamed of having such an ordinary primitive disease in his body. Alcohol in the infirmary was always available. Therefore, it was surprising that alcohol was available. Institutov's medical service was one convulsive race. Couldn't heal. Almost all the time they took away responsible and ambiguous cases, perhaps similar to illnesses, but only because they smelled of death. He did not know that in such cases people were driven by zeal, self-interest or fear. He himself wanted to get rid of painful assignments simply as quickly as possible, and each time, only because of disgust, did everything in the best possible way, contriving at the same time to sparkle with sterile purity and justify fully. One of the names given to doctors is people in white coats. Institutov felt with contempt that he was being used for his own purposes as a cleaner in such cases, when they themselves were afraid of getting dirty, but could only inaudibly rebel in their souls or suffer needlessly, despising their superiors. Although, apparently, this was his nature. He had been too lazy to treat his teeth for a long time, or, again, disdained unclean smelly mouths, preferring to tear them clean, especially to the lower ranks, not embarrassed to inflict pain. In his work as a dentist, every day, sometimes causing pain, sometimes relieving it, he personally experienced little. He worked. In such cases, he said, "So, what can you do, my dear? Be patient, I am a doctor, not pain." They went to him with fear, probably before the most powerful pain over people. They trembled before him, prayed for him, although it was only a toothache that inspired fear. From time to time, the tooth puller felt in himself this intoxicating power over people, but did not know what to desire, and was addicted only to the extermination of mice. Institutov was tempted to poison these creatures or load the stupid mouse guillotine not out of the boredom of life, and if he exterminated, he did not know despondency. He loved only himself in the world, and not even with the blind blood love that one loves one's own flesh, but voluptuously, lustfully, as if one flesh incessantly lusted for another, more beautiful one. However, all his paradise on earth was destroyed every day by mice, which are driven by themselves only by fright. He was especially tormented and suffered when he found fresh mouse droppings right in his pockets, which was not only white, but even shaped like tablets. Only these grey ubiquitous creatures were to blame for everything. Either he muttered, "They want to kill me," and looked haunted, frowning, all pitiful and unhappy, then plaintively informed someone aloud, "They do not take a real part in public life." And the very fact that he could not cope with the theft, when these creatures every minute impudently stole something in the infirmary, completely drove him crazy. The grey little creatures were already the cause of Institutov's torment, just like those when they suffer with their teeth, and it seems that their whole life shudders pitifully, suspended on a rack by some kind of painful worm, just a stile with a worm. He understood what they were talking about. He could distinguish almost everyone by sight, knowing for sure that it was the mouse that he had seen in the treatment room or somewhere else the previous week that had scurried under the closet in his office. I remember exactly what kind and how much she stole, what she allowed herself to do, and what harm she does in general. He saw in mice a breeding ground for all contagious diseases, including cholera and plague, declaring for some reason that mice exist and eat only in garbage cans, although they lived and ate next to him, or even downright with him, in his office and his forgotten piece of baked goods on the table. The main fault of all these creatures, obviously, was that, according to Institutov, they were plotting to kill him. And it used to seem to him, as if in delirium, that one day they would climb up the body, nor through the throat or veins, otherwise they would penetrate right into the mouth. So the chief medical officer, in some higher sense, was not so much overwhelmed by the savage passion to exterminate their entire family, as he tirelessly saved own life. He saw in mice a breeding ground for all contagious diseases, including cholera and plague, declaring for some reason that mice exist and eat only in garbage cans, although they lived and ate next to him, or even downright with him, in his office and his forgotten piece of baked goods on the table. The main fault of all these creatures, obviously, was that, according to Institutov, they were plotting to kill him. And it used to seem to him, as if in delirium, that one day they would climb up the body, nor through the throat or veins, otherwise they would penetrate right into the mouth. So the chief medical officer, in some higher sense, was not so much overwhelmed by the savage passion to exterminate their entire family, as he tirelessly saved own life. He saw in mice a breeding ground for all contagious diseases, including cholera and plague, declaring for some reason that mice exist and eat only in garbage cans, although they lived and ate next to him, or even downright with him, in his office and his forgotten piece of baked goods on the table. The main fault of all these creatures, obviously, was that, according to Institutov, they were plotting to kill him. And it used to seem to him, as if in delirium, that one day they would climb up the body, nor through the throat or veins, otherwise they would penetrate right into the mouth. So the chief medical officer, in some higher sense, was not so much overwhelmed by the savage passion to exterminate their entire family, as he tirelessly saved own life. In his office and his forgotten piece of baked goods on the table. The main fault of all these creatures, obviously, was that, according to Institutov, they were plotting to kill him. And it used to seem to him, as if in delirium, that one day they would climb up the body, nor through the throat or veins, otherwise they would penetrate right into the mouth. So the chief medical officer, in some higher sense, was not so much overwhelmed by the savage passion to exterminate their entire family, as he tirelessly saved own life. In his office and his forgotten piece of baked goods on the table. The main fault of all these creatures, obviously, was that, according to Institutov, they were plotting to kill him. And it used to seem to him, as if in delirium, that one day they would climb up the body, nor through the throat or veins, otherwise they would penetrate right into the mouth. So the chief medical officer, in some higher sense, was not so much overwhelmed by the savage passion to exterminate their entire family, as he tirelessly saved own life. But rarely did any chemical poison with the taste of saltpeter act on them, as if rodents had long ago discovered the antidote in medicines that they ate in the infirmary. Institutov bought mousetraps with his hard-earned money and stuffed them with tasty odorous bait purchased at his own expense. Every second mouse, taught by experience, patiently ate these traps, eating at his own expense, and she, this every second, was in a hurry to bring into the world every month a new and new offspring. It turned out that it was impossible to exterminate them unless they were exterminated all at once, for example, by setting fire to the infirmary. Closer to the night, when the chief medical officer left the place of the battle for his life, mice came in formation like a parade. The lights had not yet been put out, although everyone was lying on their cots and ready to go to sleep. Suddenly, across the flat, vast expanse of linoleum, looking like greyskins like soldiers in overcoats, they began to swim as if in a parade of their ranks. Probably, the most hardened in battles participated in the parades. Their movements were decisive and well coordinated. Having passed the circle, the mouse militia disappeared under the universal laughter. Then they put out the light, fell asleep in blissful silence, and the mice fought somewhere, bravely survived until the morning. Cats and cats, whom Institutov used to put into the infirmary for catching mice, did not linger for a long time and ingloriously ran away after a day or two, climbing the apple trees in the garden and falling from them like screaming comets onto their native asphalt. Since the first of the felines, whom they managed to call Barsak, ran away, such a name somehow clung to itself and to the rest. Barsakov caressed. They gave milk. But the animals still wanted to be free. The chief med did not like, by the way, almost all animals, as if all of them in one way or another came from mice that he hated. Cats that also ate in the garbage dumps, and brazenly something was always stolen from someone he would gladly strangle and hang if he didn't need them, and he himself caught in the garbage dumps, smuggling them into the infirmary secretly at the bottom of his briefcase, wrapped fastidiously in cellophane. It was impossible for the chief medical officer to remain without patients. Those who recovered long ago, fattened up to bashful girlish blushes on puffy cheeks, were condemned to eternal treatment. Someone had to bring sterile cleanliness every day, which he would admire, as well as listen to his teachings and work for their own good, but not the orderlies, arrogant from idleness, whom he himself was afraid of, and therefore they were skilled submissive boys who were listed for more than 1 month. He has been contagiously ill in the state, and his ailments smoothly flowed into a chronic form. In their units, they guarded those convicted of crimes and went around in convoys, some on guard, but since they ended up in the infirmary, they had no way out for a month or more. They were born somewhere, but at the same time. So almost everyone was 18 years old when the time came. At first, in the mass of their own kind, disguised as the color of grass and earth, they either ran, or crawled, or strode selectively in one direction, but did not distinguish between themselves or their own kind and did not understand their fate. It was not a detachment, and not a herd, and not a crowd, but a people, with its own task, but also character. Childishly gullible, and already quite downtrodden. Incredibly hardy, and groaning, languishing with a little complaint. Lively and lazy. It seemed that all of them, following those who gave birth to them, came into the world only to grow up and have time to die, to leave behind the same trusting, hardy, groaning, tenacious, lazy child. Many of those who were escorted by fate to the infirmary were already mockingly telling the same boring stories about how they almost died. Only the one who wanted to lay hands on himself kept silent in the corner. And a real hero suffered alone for all. Although life in a hospital bed was much more nutritious than in the barracks, and even more so in the barracks, the words "a hospital regime," "hospital contingent" of yesterday's guards and escorts made an unreasonable noise in their heads, so that they unbearably wanted to be free. All the local whims suddenly became reflected from the stinking prison and the filthy camp, already with their regimes, the contingent and the black lost hole. The feeling of walking in front of oneself along a narrow and straight corridor, as if under escort, was unaccustomed. The self-satisfied hostile glances of those who wandered from freedom oppressively shook off their former posture from their shoulders. The bathrobe issued in the infirmary humiliated me for some reason. The officer's chamber, which was always filled with uninhabited emptiness and mice, once hid separately in an oppressive silence. And since those days, when a young lieutenant settled in the infirmary, it became painful even without special reasons. On the day of admission, the new patient was accompanied by 2 officers who did not look like medical workers. Moreover, they were also foreigners, with sunburned faces. All those who arrived were still free of overcoats. They served, therefore, on the edge of the steppes, where the sun was as hot as in the desert, either in spring or in autumn, and sometimes they went crazy from monotony and longing. For some reason, from such a distance, the lieutenant was taken to Karaganda under escort of some officers to be placed in a simple infirmary. The escorts waited like idols until they received a burnt, dusty officer's uniform, similar to a skin peeled off by a stocking. With a uniform in their hands, they immediately disappeared energetically in fulfillment of the unknown will that sent them. The lieutenant, whose uniform had been taken somewhere for some reason, depriving him of either his clothes or his freedom, was given a hospital gown in the infirmary's dressing room, spacious, but so shabby that the officer looked like a beggar even in the desert garden, where he was seen tightly fenced when infiltrating the air to smoke. They also saw him every morning in the household room, where he washed his face with a thorough shave. The chief medical officer was in charge of the infirmary as if at home, and it was impossible to take a step without his homely reproaches and urgings. Probably no woman was born who could master this evil womanhood, which is why Institutov, no matter how he got out of his skin, trying to please both girls and women, vegetated as a barren bachelor. With the corrosiveness of a eunuch, the chief medical officer not only put people and objects in order, but also voiced his own order with boring speeches. If something living or even inanimate appeared in the infirmary, Institutov immediately started his own opinion, and everyone had to give him pleasure, not only following his rules, but also listening to his speech. About the appearance of the lieutenant, however, he kept a cautious silence and diligently protected himself from contact with this new personality, as if a strange young man had been placed in the infirmary on purpose in order not to be treated. When Institutov took it into his head to surround the newcomer with a semblance of quarantine, his gaze naturally clung to one of the forced soldiers, who was already busy with work and towered alone on the painting goats under the ceiling. The chief medical officer fell silent for a moment when a conscientious, ticklish chill pierced, but pompously stupidly said, "Kolmogorov. Come on, my dear, come down from heaven." He obediently looked up from his work and clumsily descended from the height of the painter goats, half naked and smeared from head to toe with whitewash, similar to a gypsum garden blockhead. Looking irritably at the statue with his hands down, Institutov frowned and grunted, "Well, my dear, there will be more work. Serve breakfast, lunch, dinner to the officers' ward and take away the dirty dishes when our new patient has eaten." Eternal tooth. A month has passed since this dead soul, demobilized from service, was forced to take him to the infirmary, also by the head, the owner of the training ground, the deaf ensign Abdulov, nicknamed Abdulka. A deaf unlucky warrior was in charge in an uninhabited steppe, 100 kilometers from Karaganda. Once Abdulov served in one of the escort companies, but one day he was crippled during exercises organized on the occasion of the next anniversary of the October Revolution. On that day, 2 fatal circumstances took place on an imaginary line of enemy fire. The first was that he stumbled and fell, the second was that at the place of his fall, a noise charge exploded as if on order, which depicted an explosion when 100 green men depicted a transition from defense to attack. Someone on the observation tower continued to contemplate the ant-warlike swarming of green men, only annoyed, and that short time, probably, when one of these men screamed and bled, not comprehending why this all happened to him. Abdulyev was waiting for the bitter fate of an invalid who was not needed by anyone. Saved by his own lambs, his own little cheerful farm. To everyone who was supposed to decide his fate in the medical commission and in the unit, he brought a lamb at someone's prompt. Arguing in such a way that a person who has hearing can also be deaf in every sense, and taking into account that there were no more complaints about hearing loss from the shell-shocked person, the recipients in turn recognized Abdullah Abramovich Abdulov as fit to continue service, that is perfectly healthy. The last one, who, at his own peril and risk, left the deaf to serve, gave him to feed just the most remote place, the training ground, extinct, the entire rocky sandy area in the steppe beaten by shooting and explosions. And so the barren, wild place, where the ability to hear was taken away from him, as if half his life, turned the deafened green man into a boss too. So that he would continue to be treated kindly, the shell-shocked once a year declared to his benefactor and gave something tasty. There was always one soldier subordinate to Abdulka, as many were supposed to be in the state. Probably, there was no other such commander in the regiment who commanded only one person. Most of the time of the year, free from firing, it could be sometimes weeks, and sometimes whole months, the Def lived with his woman in an urban-type settlement and only visited a remote training ground for order, and the soldier sat in the bare wild steppe all summer and winter and guarded the wind. Fatherly Abdulka loved and remembered all his little soldiers as sons, each of whom, when the time came for parting, always became his last. They were strange with him, it's like the owners of everything that he personally commanded for hardly a whole month of the year. They got to him at the training ground the same, strangers, looking around in the steppe as if doomed, but they also left him years later, inevitably replacing each other at this post in the steppe. They are also very similar, relatives, with the enlightenment of elders in their eyes, others whitened in their 20 years with grey hair. In the fall, another one was taken away and immobilized. He should have gone home long ago. But paternal Abdulka could not let go of his son just like that. He decided to bestow an eternal, iron tooth. The explosion, his own heart-rending scream, the sight of blood that poured from his ears, everything terrible that happened once at the training ground, so frightened and touched Abdulka that after that all sorts of things made him exactly this impression of eternity. He inserted metal teeth for himself in the past, even one gold one, but he never thought that they would remain after his death. That they, for example, will be found in his grave even after 1,000 years. A touching and timid desire to have something eternal in himself prompted Abdulka to insert iron teeth instead of healthy ones, after which there was only pride in his life that these, even stainless pieces of eternity, radiantly shining in the sun, when the shell-shocked became angry or smiled in full mouth. To give his last son the same tooth was for him like dividing this celebration of human life into two. What kind of person are you without a tooth? SOSO man, dust from dust, sand, the wind will blow, and you will fly apart. Abdulka loudly voiced, like all the deaf, he did not hear what he said, and his voice came out, as if from a loudspeaker. The soldier was not stubborn and believed that the shell-shocked man only wanted the best. Abdulka showed up at Institutov's with a carcass of a lamb wrapped in sacking logs. He made such a generous offering voluntarily and only out of his own naivety. Institutov would have been buttered by the sight of a leg of lamb, but Abdulka already missed his native soldier so much that no other force or common sense could force him to moderate his sacrifice. Behind the back of the fatherly Abdulka, as if he had done something wrong, dressed in full dress, stood the same soldier. He looked like a big child who had been confused since he was born. He had with him a document proving the identity of the defender of the motherland, 45 rubles of monetary allowance only received in the regimental accounting department, and an order giving the right to Private Alexei Mikhailovich Kolmogorov for a reserved seat ticket to any part of the vast country. All savvy, the practical chief medical officer did not praise the generosity of the soul of Abdullah Abramovich, but swore to insert the best iron tooth to the soldier in the most visible place, which would be one with him until death. Abdulka so easily believed not the word of this man, but the law of human life, to which he himself obeyed, like an ant, and which, being a man, he could violate only by receiving a similar punishment right there in return for some kind of death. According to this law, which Abdulka obeyed like an ant, it was not given to any person on earth, another such ant, to deceive him if he took something ahead for his work, because it would not be given to live after that. Wishing to gain only such confidence, Abdulka prepared a lamb for the head nurse. The mention of death, however, touched Abdulka, and he burst into tears unexpectedly, as at a funeral shell-shocked knew how to understand. At that moment, when the paternal Abdulka began to cry, Kolmogorov almost burst into tears, feeling like an orphan. Abdullah Ibrahimovich, I can do without a tooth, let's go, I'll live without it. Alyosha exclaimed. The stranger, who had been paid for his work, shuddered unpleasantly. But the deaf man did not hear anything, and the soldier, feeling remorse for some reason, remained standing where he was. Saying goodbye to the landfill owner for a long time, Institutov glanced furtively at the boy, who already irritated him with his stupid appearance. Fearing that if Abdulka said goodbye, he might well again rush into the infirmary, the chief medical officer immediately after his departure removed the tooth intended for iron, but waited a day or two and forgot about his duty. He inspired at first that you can't do a tooth in a day or two, if you do it for centuries. Alyosha confided in the chief medical officer with relief. It was always clearer and easier for him to believe than not to believe. Only a deceived person would stop believing in that person who, even during this time, would have managed to deceive many times. Kolmogorov tried to persuade himself, it's okay, I'll wait another week, and then I'll take the train and go home. To make the waiting flow more imperceptibly, he agreed to perform the work in the infirmary, which they would say. Although here it turned out that it was not of his own free will that he helps, but personally works out his future eternal tooth to the chief medical officer. Kolmogorov could pack up and leave any day. All documents were with him. He had not been in the regiment for a long time. The chief medical officer was ready to endure his presence in the infirmary, and, moreover, to his advantage. He simply did not dare to put him out of the door, being afraid that this fact could become known to Abdulka. And during the last time I forgot my trifling, I will do it when I want, and appointed as a debtor, if you work, then I will do it. Or even more clearly, you, my dear, by the way, no one is keeping you here. But Kolmogorov, as if on purpose, endured everything and waited for what he had promised. Alyosha, although he did not know the great law of life honored by Abdulka, but believed him, and now it was necessary to believe the head of the medical unit, whom Abdullah Abramovich believed. Therefore, the dodgy, worthless promise of tomorrow, the desperate promise of a fussy, cornered little man, was suddenly overgrown with human fatal truth. In the meantime, everyone he met asked Alyoshka where he had lost a tooth, and Kolmogorov willingly entered into a conversation. They pulled it out to insert a new one. I thought, so lucky, the very first going home. But I decided to treat my teeth, and the last one, probably, will leave. But then there will be no trouble. Iron will last a lifetime. But they tried to ridicule this confidence of his, and if it rusts. And he, when everyone laughed at him, also smiled, but with a convulsive, distant smile, which so disfigured his face, that the chuckles of those around him, out of disgust, involuntarily began to fade, resemble a cough, and hid. Alyosha twitched briskly, like a frog from an electric shock, and rejoiced, thinking that everyone was listening to him. I think it won't rust or wear off, life is too short for that, I won't live 200 years. Such a life has not yet been made on earth. He, of course, was sad, even melancholy, but through the sadness longing, like grass, a colourful surprise with life made its way out, to the light. This surprise took over Alyosha by the time he came of age so strong that from the outside he seemed to everyone sleepy, lazy, and seldom a shout did not take him by surprise. Then he woke up, and began to work, but for a long time, drowsily. And if, it happened, they started to urge, spoiled the work, and everything was aggravated by his natural clumsiness, so that he already began to destroy with such work, and did not create. Kolmogorov's soul was like good porridge, instead of splashing, it was careful and gravitated with its warmth to peace. When the heat filled her, even then she ardently inflated her goiter like a toad. And she needed time for everything, both if she was inflamed, and in order to cool down. He heavily, involuntarily left every habitable place even for an hour. And if the course of life has already changed, he closes himself, still living with colourful memories of what he was used to. But isolation took power over him at first, until the anxiety passed and the unknown became familiar, and the experienced became ordinary. Alyosha, not even seriously, but with the trepidation of a person involved in the sacrament, considered himself lucky and worried that luck could go away just as causelessly as it was given. But what he considered luck was wonderful only for him, and got into the last hands. He trustingly felt himself unlike others, as if rewarded, and, noticing around people with shortcomings, he managed to pity them, not feeling that he should pity himself. At first glance, they saw in him an outstanding only by his clumsiness, a gloomy, self-aware, backward, flawed creature. When the replenishment was unloaded on the parade ground, the recruiters who recruited people for their services saw only this in it, and everyone waved it off. Send this stupid one to Abdulka. We don't need such goodness. This one needs to be fed. And sent in a despicable ambulance, a one-way flight, without fellow travelers, and Alyosha was saying goodbye to the regiment and, realizing that he had been sent to a special deserted place, he thought about how unspeakably lucky he was and what kind of trust or encouragement they had shown behind his back. Others, whom it was a pity, were exiled in no other way. Everyone knew and remembered the road to the training ground. A stony, sunburned track in summer, and in winter a narrow trench cut by a tractor in the marble of snowdrifts. The nearest village where people lived was 15 kilometers away. From there, Abdulka ran into the owner on a motorcycle. When firing was organized, for 3 days in a row, companies arrived at the training ground one after another. They deployed in human chains, dug in, shot, and after that the landfill died out, became empty. All its free lands could not be covered by the eye. It was also impossible to enclose such a space, and therefore the borders marked lonely posts, remote from each other, at a visibility distance, similar to huge pale toadstools, fungi that hid sentinels from the heat or rains, exposed for that short time, when from many misses after machine gun bursts bullets wandered aimlessly across the steppe, and unintentional civilians happened to go astray and wandered to the training ground. Fascinated by the formidable cannonade of weapons, Kolmogorov was brought to the training ground when it was already getting dark. The gentle darkness of twilight hid everything that he was so eager to see. From the impenetrability, the winds blew with imperious cold, howling dully in the ears, as if in seashells. The headlights of the ambulance melted dusky gold from a swarm of grains of sand, visible only in the light. Two human voices, the driver and the landfill owner, were cursing somewhere in the dark, not understanding each other. The driver, the same forced servant boy, barked goodbye with deadly gaiety, running into the cab. "Your boss is deaf. He is like that, even if he yells in his ears, he will not hear. If you want his mother, brother. Hey, Abdulka. Freak. Gouging. Stinky." When it got dark in the place where a minute ago the engine snorted warmly and the headlights shone empty, loneliness surged. On the island, where, with the clarity of a beacon, a white tower building rose imperturbably over the dark echoing steppe, which burned with low, almost level with the ground, windows and was crowned at the top with a powerful searchlight with a black eye, two remained standing, Alyosha, who had just been abandoned on the island, and that savage, in homely simple clothes and slippers shod on his bare feet, whom the driver ridiculed in parting. Stocky, unshaven, resembling either a bath attendant or a gravedigger, frightening with a loud bark of unintelligible words, he dragged Kolmogorov into the tower. Alyosha found himself in a large empty room, box-shaped, with an inconspicuous iron staircase that led up to an extinguished opening in the ceiling. The landfill owner, it turned out, was in a hurry to leave for the night. Abdullayev left everything, but cursed in his heart as if he had found a blatant mess in the room. And the fault was he, Alyosha, who did not understand that he would be staying here for the night. The shell-shocked man rumbled with everything that came to hand, and wailed, trying to get him to nod his head at least once, "Give a sign, sleep here, you understand. I'll bring food, water, linen, soap tomorrow, you understand. Hey, are you deaf? I'm telling you." Leaving, Abdulka locked the door from the outside, turned off the light. Alyosha was lying on a bunk, as if in a prison cell, and fell asleep only in the morning, when light shone in the windows and calmed the soul. The chief rushed to the training ground at dawn and arranged a wake-up call for his new employee. A few more days passed. Kolmogorov silently and meekly did everything that the angry noisy man said to do, who, before disappearing at the end of each day, locked him in the tower with a padlock. Once, during work, Kolmogorov turned to the boss from the back, and when Abdulka never turned around at his call, and he called him louder and louder, Alyosha suddenly realized that the owner of the landfill did not hear his words. He stood still silently and then, overcoming fear, touched his shoulder. Abdulka turned around sharply and jumped to his feet with a brutal expression on his face, but immediately slumped in embarrassment, seeing the confused, weak boy from his gas, and consoled as best he could, "You and me, you and I will be like one soul, son. If anything, do not be afraid, push, I am deaf, but not a woman you can touch." Kolmogorov only said, "Uncle, what is your name at least? How can I contact you? Do you understand? What are you saying? What did you say?" Abdulka shouted again, but when he understood what they were asking about, he condescended, "You talk a lot. What difference does it make to you? I am like a father to you. Know this." Abdulka still liked to think aloud. Alyosha, hearing the deaf man's voice that seemed otherworldly, thought pityingly of himself, "I have no one to talk to." He realized this the entire period of his silence and felt that reality was already turning into a whirling wandering of dumb feelings, thoughts. When he took pity on himself, something slippery and poisonous coiled around his heart, tempting him. "Look, he is crying incessantly, he feels good, but you feel bad and it won't get better." Abdulka tracked down for a long time, shouting, not giving rest, wanting to complete the test. He loaded him with work, the most stupid, so that he would not eat anything in vain, but on each occasion he reproached Alyosha for eating too much, but he should eat little by little, put less in his mouth and chew longer. The next month, already on the reserves saved by the boss, Alyosha ate enough, so he was very happy, and Abdulka celebrated his rightness. Kolmogorov became related to the deaf, involuntarily imbued with that paternal that was hidden in a man who first cut his diet for his own benefit and then generously doubled it, saving him from hunger. They have already traveled around the farm more than once, scattered across the steppe for 5 kilometers. Right from the threshold of the observation tower, the shooting range began. It was deserted, and all this man-made well-groomed battlefield looked like a huge dummy in the open air. The horizon was obscured by loose red hills, 2 kilometers away from the line of sight. This visible space was to be shot through at each of its points. It was webbed with incomprehensible lines of communication, narrow winding lines of trenches. Still farther away, a mirage appeared in the bare steppe of a toy-like town, consisting of 4 panel boxes and a semblance of a square. All houses were 3 stories tall. The window openings gaped like gouged eye sockets. Every hole in the wall must be burned. Everything around smelled of burning, although it was not visible what could burn. That's right, they burned something here. The shooting ranges looked like a children's playground, with asphalt paths and markings that made it look like they were learning the rules of the road. Each such object was arranged separately, like a sports equipment, and the objects were again connected by asphalt paths. The rationality, the meticulousness of how everything was arranged here against the Martian dead background, fascinated, as the feeling of horror fascinates. In the absence of people, one could not believe that it was all created by them, but it seemed that people were carefully destroyed here by some otherworldly mind that could not only destroy, but also leave no traces, establishing its own dead order. And it seemed that there is life here, as it is in the sand, if this sandy torment is the dust of something living. At the training ground, only sand crawled over the asphalt paths in snakes. They visibly crawled before our eyes, as soon as even a light breeze blew from the steppe. Then it became palpable to the point of chills that around the paths grains of sand were swarming and swaying, a boundless desert living land. But from time to time, Kolmogorov got used to looking at everything as a household, taught by Abdulka to manage this household, not remembering himself. On a typical day, he had to sweep the asphalt paths at the shooting range and go around all the objects as a watchman. The day before the shooting, the mechanisms were checked and prepared for work. And on the day when they came to shoot, Alyosha, in the sweat of his face, crawled on his belly along the technical trenches, shaking what was stuck, and even 3 steel flat rusty blockheads, they are standing, lying and waste target, could not do without him. With him, steel blockheads rose from the trenches, like the dead from coffins, starting, if necessary, even to move on hinges. At the right time, pyrotechnics were torn and explosions thundered for warning. And 3 steel flat rusty blockheads, they are standing, lying and waste targets, could not do without it. With him, steel blockheads rose from the trenches, like the dead from coffins, starting, if necessary, even to move on hinges. At the right time, pyrotechnics were torn and explosions thundered for warning. And 3 steel flat rusty blockheads, they are standing, lying and waste targets, could not do without it. With him, steel blockheads rose from the trenches, like the dead from coffins, starting, if necessary, even to move on hinges. At the right time, pyrotechnics were torn and explosions thundered for warning. Immersed in this amusing and menacing world, Kolmogorov felt at times like a ghost. And such was he, a man whose existence here was known and remembered only by the deaf Abdulka. The soldiers on the line of fire did not know about him. They did not know that under those blockheads, where they fired pitchwise, a living soul was hiding in the trench. Abdulka tightened his bulletproof vest on him, put on his helmet and sent him with a sigh into the coming hell. The first shots were fired at the targets. Alyosha's soul froze. He heard what they had not heard there, a kilometer away, how bullets were beating at the blockheads, how, squashing and smacking droppings under them, tinkling and hissing. Heard their howl, when they were rushing in hail, he began to stall. The soul plunged into this infernal music, trembled in the womb emptiness, being born and frozen in horror, when an electric buzz suddenly strained the lock chain. If it so happened that the machine stuck or there was not enough traction in the chain to lift the blockhead that had been knocked down by a hit, Alyosha had to crawl up to the iron friend and help move with his strength. The firing stopped as they waited for the targets to rise. Alyosha, as if from birth, knew about the non-lethal silence, promising relaxation of the nerves and a respite for those who fired. She was in his will, and he gave her every minute. But his hands still trembled during work, as if they were being shocked, and his body writhed painfully from every movement. At such moments, in this silence, for some reason, the fear of death instilled in him. The line of fire was silent. People on the other side did not notice anything alive in the firing range. The fact that the boobies again silently appeared as if from under the ground was always unexpected and stirred the blood. Although they did not move and stood as targets for execution, for a moment, a slight, exciting panic arose in people, and whose turn it was, they became numb. Something else happened with Alyosha. He swiftly, already with the vitality of a cockroach, ran away on all fours along the bottom of the trench into his gap. There were also night shootings, when the darkness made the shooting of targets look like a hunt. A searchlight beam wandered over the tin blockheads, pulling them out of the dusk, and they flopped, as in a boiling cauldron, rushing from side to side. The blood-yellow air of the night was slashed by tracers, white-hot automatic bursts. Alyosha did not get out of his trench for 3 or 4 hours. It was as if they were also looking for him with the whole pack. They killed him with every shot, and they could not kill him. But after the shooting, the firing range inevitably plunged into desolation and hibernation. Bird-like shy winds returned and covered the steppe with even ashes. Alyosha collected spent shell casings, non-ferrous metal, which, after being melted down, probably turned into cartridges again, and got used to the silence like an animal. It seemed that he was wandering all day long across the steppe, level with the sky. He lay down on the ground. He lay as long as he could. He got up, wandered by force for a walk, as long as he could go. In order to somehow spend some time preparing food, either he cooked soup with stew and cereals, or he brewed it thicker, and it turned out to be porridge. No longer able to force himself to think about something and fight about every silent minute alone with himself, Alyosha reveled easily and quickly in dreams, and then wandered unconsciously across the steppe. Most often, in his dreams, he performed feats, and at the same time, the feat was necessarily the price of life. He also dreamed of being needed by someone, saving someone. Or he imagined himself in a war, in battle, where he died in his dreams, saving his comrades, whom he again dreamed of. Forgetting himself in dreams, he used to not touch food for a day or two, as if he were sacrificing a portion for someone, and he did not suffer from hunger. In himself, he felt enlightenment, peace, and even Abdulka disappeared from his memory, and food became something unbearable, like a reminder of life. When Abdulka suddenly ran into her, nothing changed in her either. He could only bring his own home-cooked food to treat and old newspapers to wipe, from which Alyosha learned past news. A deaf man could get a radio for him, which Alyosha once asked for, but every visit he cursed, "Forget that lousy radio, there's nothing to listen to. You will know a lot, stupid head, you will get sick, you will disappear. Does the bird know a lot, think a lot? And it flies high, high, far, far." It surprised the paternal Abdulka, and even frightened him that the boy lived without letters. He himself did not write to his relatives and received no news from them. It was, back in the summer, a deaf man asked, "Why don't you write a letter home?" And he heard in response, "Why write, Abdullah Abramovich, summer means all my gardens. We can't live without a garden." Later, in the fall, when I asked about the same thing, I heard from Alyosha, "Why write, they are digging potatoes. We can't live without potatoes." By winter, he nevertheless, without listening to anything, put him behind a piece of paper and ordered him, already as a boss, to write to his forgotten, as it seemed to him, parents. Alyosha sat over the paper for a long time and wrote, "Hello, Mom and Dad. I serve my homeland well, as you said, I do everything. Mom, take care of yourself. Dad, take care of yourself. I also take care of myself. Goodbye, your son Alexei." For the new year, for the holiday, a package arrived from his native land. Abdulka received it, brought it to the landfill. It contained sweets, cookies, jam, everything sweet. And a letter, "Hello, son. Eat and share with friends. Eat jam first, otherwise it will turn sour, and sweets with cookies later. We protect ourselves. Plucked our goats the other day. There will be 2 scarves and a dozen more socks. In the winter I will sell, we will have bread. You can't live without it. Serve your country well, as we said. We are waiting for you home. Eat the jam first, otherwise it will turn sour. There will be 2 scarves and a dozen more socks. In the winter I will sell, we will have bread. You can't live without it. Serve your country well, as we said. We are waiting for you home. Eat the jam first, otherwise it will turn sour. There will be 2 scarves and a dozen more socks. In the winter I will sell, we will have bread. You can't live without it. Serve your country well, as we said. We are waiting for you home. Eat the jam first, otherwise it will turn sour. Abdulka calculated how much water and bread he left, how much work he assigned, and he usually declared himself according to the calculation. Again he brought in water, bread, invented a job, took his soul in complaints about everything in the world, and went home. Alyosha knew this road that led to the village, but he had nothing to look for among the people. He already avoided that life. Once a week he had to go to the bath. The 6th Guard Company guarded the penal colony near the village. Their bathing day was on Sundays. Alyosha came in the morning, without turning anywhere, and huddled on a bench near the bathhouse while the company owners were washing. A stranger to everyone, he endured ridicule and poking, but if he did not answer, it was because he felt only surprise. Voices, crowds of people, vanity, everything surprised him, and he was silent, deaf. And everyone knew for some time that a deaf-mute goes to the bathhouse, adding with a grin all the same as about a fool, from the training ground. If it weren't for the shooting, which was like falling from heavenly walks to the bottom of a pitch-black trench, then the silence with grace could have driven you crazy. In winter it became more difficult to live. More darkness and loneliness. But the frost enlightened, gave rise to peace in the soul even more palpable than hunger. Raking the snowy mountains alone, Alyosha fell from exhaustion and blissfully fell asleep in the warmth of the stove, and during the night snow piled up again and in the same place grew, as if from the same grain, snowdrifts exactly the same in shape and size. In the tower, he stoked the stove, sparing the ember, without which it was impossible to live. And when I went out every day to rake snow blockages where everything should have been glowing by the start of shooting only with an even ice crust like on a skating rink, I suddenly felt that there would be no life without this Sisyphean work. He began to feel happy that throws shovels of snow into a firebox so as not to die. The sparkling, blue twilight winter palace was suddenly enveloped in great earthly warmth, so that Alyosha took off his stuffy sheepskin coat, then his ear-flaps, and finally, naked to the waist, solemnly walked along the clean, light paths, believing that he had warmed the earth. In the very first winter, this miracle happened to him. Every new day, waking up, he began to live as if nothing had happened, no longer remembering yesterday. Everything was forgotten by itself, burned in the soul like an ember, lived a day, warmed up, we must continue to live. Every new day, waking up, he began to live as if nothing had happened, no longer remembering yesterday. Everything was forgotten by itself, burned in the soul like an ember, lived a day, warmed up, we must continue to live. Every new day, waking up, he began to live as if nothing had happened, no longer remembering yesterday. Everything was forgotten by itself, burned in the soul like an ember, lived a day, warmed up, we must continue to live. This simple decree descended on Alyosha in the winter, when he walked with a sledge for bread and water. Paternal Abdulka prudently sent his motorcycle to winter in a barn and entrusted the most needy to provide his first necessity. Before dawn, Alyosha was getting ready for the campaign. He reached the inhabited land of the village by noon. In the kitchen of the guard company, he received a bag of rye loaves, stocked up a full can of drinking water. Although he extracted water from the snow for all other needs, drinking still ended quickly and there was nothing to save on here. It happened that there was still half a bag of bread left and the water had already come out. And this always puzzled him. Ordinary water, it turns out, is more precious than bread, and you drag it not only in the same way as bread, but also tear yourself up because of it. Harnessing himself to the sled, Alyosha cursed his heavy load, as, probably, a horse would quietly curse in his soul at a laden cart. But if the horse knew that the load of the cart consisted of hay, which she would feed herself, then her anger would be replaced by joy. Alyosha, as a human being, could not restrain himself from ardent resentment, as if someone could deliberately come up with such a thing, so that a person dragged, strained himself, and after walking 15 kilometers, lowered into his womb what he tore himself with, all this heavy load and the path itself turning into nothing. It was on the winter road to nowhere, loaded with what turned into nothing, that Alyosha found the simple command of life. Time after time his human resentment lost its fervor. Time after time, he slowly forgot that he was stillborn a man and not a horse. And one day I felt myself just like a horse, which is watered and fed only for being harnessed to a cart. Yes, this is all my living thing. It's all turning into me. My water, my bread, here they are warming, dear. At that moment, when he got up from fatigue to take a breath, Alyosha caught a light breath in the frosty burning air with his insensible lips. It slipped in a flap and breathed in a hot, wet weakness. the expanse covered with the polar wave, where Alyosha stuck like a pole, wanting to catch his breath for a moment, flickered with myriads of snowflakes that were as if alive, and new myriads quietly fell from above, where the frozen distant sky looked like forests standing under the snow, where everything at once shook something imperious, strong. But one of them melted on his lips. Alyosha even imagined that he saw her when she was descending in a circle, but already so lonely, doomed, as if she was circling and circling above him, knowing that she would melt. The most unreasonable mood entered into him. He walked so much before that, standing motionless, he expired and could catch a cold, freezing in the cold. I'll catch a cold and die. Alyosha imagined how he would rush about in a fever, begging for water, dying. But with the courage of a child, he stood in the middle of all this permafrost, pitying the dead snowflake. In spite of a future cold, he sat on the sled and decided that he would feast. He chewed an ice cream slice of bread and drank ice-cold water from a can. When he was slowly satisfied, he sedately and nobly harnessed himself to the sled again and wandered on, as if now he had to live forever. But what happened to him then left an almost physical trace. Now Kolmogorov often forgot himself and a smile froze on his face by itself. There was something ugly about her, like a scarred face laughing. Noticing this, Abdulka at first only got angry, thinking that Alyosha was silent and smiling somehow on purpose. Kolmogorov regained consciousness from his shouts, and confusedly did not understand anything. Abdulka thought that some kind of mental illness had happened to his worker. Deciding that this wintering made Alyosha like this, he calmed down. In the winter it came, in the spring it would leave. But the pensiveness did not pass, and the landfill owner began to fear that Alyoshka had once imperceptibly been shell-shocked in the trench. For some time, fatherly Abdulka was tormented by fears whether this disease was fatal or not. With anguish, he frightened himself that if the truth was revealed, then they will quickly shift all the blame on him. They will say that Abdulov did not see it. But it seemed that the disease was still not fatal, and therefore he decided to remain silent and pretend that he did not notice anything. Sometimes suddenly burst out of him, when he was unable to endure this smile, which seemed to him some kind of pain. Son, don't be sad. But Alyosha did not think that he was sad. What are you, Abdullah Ibrahimovich? Do not be afraid. I rejoice in myself. What are you happy about? What's fun for you? Asked, reading his lips, Abdulka. Yes, like that. Is it really supposed to be sad? See how good everything is all around. You're crazy, aren't you? Yes. Just like that. It's good. How? Once, at the end of summer, Abdulka rushed to the training ground at night and surprised his soldier with the news, war. Brother went to brother. The deaf man was shocked and frightened, and he rushed to the steppe to hide in no other way, but Kolmogorov still could not believe what he was saying. Abdulka did not sleep at night. Several times he shook the sleeping Alyoshka, fearing his loneliness and silence. People have gone berserk. Why don't they live in peace? What do they want? Why is war needed? Whether complained, whether asked. Sleep, Abdullah Ibrahimovich, Alyosha mumbled. You just fall asleep, and life will pass. But he did not close his eyes and waited for something, painfully listening to the silence. There was no war anywhere. On the third day, an indignant wife came for him from the village, a greedy, healthy woman who had a common household with a deaf man. She exhorted, sobbed, threatened, shouted. On the day when the order came that Alexei Kolmogorov had served his term, fatherly Abdulka climbed into the trenches himself and gave him his place on the tower. All the years, living in this tower, Alyosha did not go upstairs, where the iron staircase led and where he could only be deaf, who zealously guarded this right, forbidding even a glance or simply hanging a lock on the iron door of the hatch. He found himself in a transparent shell, closed from huge thick glass showcases. Then he felt like a fish in an aquarium. The body itself became light, steps on the concrete echoing floor, smooth, sleepy. And where he looked in surprise from his aquarium depth, as if into a strange unknown world, life chains unfolded, multi-ton armored personnel carriers crawled like wood lice, the swarming of militant little men looked like an anthill, dropping the formation and ridiculously losing the purely serious drill that fell from the marches like pants. Or suddenly reactive whitish exhausts of machine gun shots appeared in the air. They blossomed for a split second by parachutes from the barrels, which were noticeable there, for the shooters, only like a rancid stench. When Alyosha was dressed in full dress and said goodbye forever to the steppe, and Abdulka put him on a motorcycle and they were supposed to go straight to Karaganda, where Kolmogorov was promised an eternal iron tooth, the deaf man caught himself and was frightened by his discovery. That's all. Old new day. Alyosha did not feel that he had been given into service. The new duty turned out to be much more sincere than one could expect from the chief medical officer, who, day after day, prescribed monotonous inanimate works. And here it was appointed to take care of the sick, to give and take away, but it was not difficult to help. Only they didn't let me know, what is the strange lieutenant ill with? After all, he stood firmly on his feet, washed himself, went out into the garden to smoke, but even from afar he looked as if in an infirmary, where they were supposed to relieve and treat illnesses. On the contrary, he was alone with his illness and did not receive at least anyone, some relief. And it came to mind that this person was gnawed by such an ailment, about which no one knows anything. Unknown not only to the patient, but also to medicine. This disease allowed him to walk, eat, and smoke, but caused suffering. In the morning, when flasks of food were brought to the infirmary, Alyosha remembered the lieutenant and got ahead of everyone so that the patient would get the first, thicker portion. With the thought of the patient, as if the meat hodgepodge was a medicine, he respectfully carried to the officer's ward everything that he had obtained in the gluttonous rush from the flasks. But the expectation of a meeting with the patient chilled in my soul when I knocked and heard an arrogantly imperious voice. It's not locked. Kolmogorov pushed the light door and froze on the threshold. In the corner, on a bunk by the window, he was reclining in a disheveled dressing gown, leaning back against the wall, an unnecessary person, it seemed, not even a military man. In the cumbersome, cold ward, with one bed laid out in the distance by the window, and with no man's empty seats left to the mercy of fate, there was a sense of disorder. The undressed, flesh-colored mattresses in the vacant beds gave off a strong smell of medicine, like some corpse. Pure white light fell from the window opening, and into the wooden frame, like a canvas, straight from the cold and from the wind. The summer barracks were put into view, an oily green plywood hut, fresh plank crosses on the windows. The lieutenant glared at the full steaming bowl. "Hello. Good morning. Here is your breakfast," Alyosha said with difficulty. The officer did not move. His face was full-bodied, with skin tanned to darkness. The whole creature was absorbed by round, impenetrable dark eyes, almost without whites, like those of an animal. Alyosha strode heavily into the ward. In one hand he carried a bowl in front of him, in the other, a mug of tea and a spoon. Everything was put on the nightstand next to the bed. The lieutenant forgot himself, touching only food with his eyes. He took hold of the spoon, but his hand trembled, as if he was silently doing something nasty, painful with it. Probably, only the annoying trembling in his own hand awakened the eater from oblivion. He raised his head, fixed his mercilessly greedy gaze on the one who stood in front of him with empty hands, but suddenly grinned and said, "Here he was standing like that." It was a commanding voice, but pretending to be quiet for some reason. Alyosha froze, and the lieutenant waited as if for an answer, even though in his words uttered with a smirk about someone unknown, there was not even a question. From the tongue escaped, "I wish you a pleasant appetite." That's what he said. Heard Kolmogorov in response. It became uncomfortable. The Swedish smell of meat hodgepodge began to wander in the officer's chamber in a longing, insatiable cloud. Alyosha instantly came to his senses and left the dying man alone, the one who was preparing, as it seemed to him, to accept death and therefore was angry at the whole world. But when Kolmogorov was released, that sense of doom, for some reason already his own, poisoned every minute. I sat down to have breakfast, but the food seemed tasteless, as if in the meantime, when I was serving the lieutenant, something happened and the hodgepodge went rancid. The tea turned out to be just as tasteless, not tea, but slop. Turned back from the soul. Sitting at the table and waiting for something else, Alyosha felt homesick. Then he woke up and remembered the lieutenant. This one, probably, had already burst and the dirty dishes were ready. Go clean up after him, since he is still alive. The lieutenant collapsed on his bunk. But he was waiting for the servants to come. The bowl was empty, the tea was drunk. A calm, lazy, sensible voice filled the ward that suddenly looked like a crypt, but it all stinks of a solarium. I eat so much fat for the first time. And this vomit they call hodgepodge. They cook it for breakfast, lunch, dinner. In autumn, summer, spring, winter. And they feed it all year round. What, fool, aren't you sick yet? Or are you happy with everything? Wow, how it looks, it directly kills with a glance, and I really like it. What? Not happy? What's your name? Well, well, if you want, take your soul away, come on, as it is, cut, just don't be silent, the grave of a nameless soldier. Kolmogorov opened his mouth and so called, like all people, by name. Well, what is your name, man? Simple. Human. What is it? The lieutenant's sword already raised himself on his elbows. You need to be at peace. You swear a lot. Painfully. What do you know about pain? Cried the lieutenant. I know, Alyosha murmured, mastering his excitement. Fool, the lieutenant suddenly said strangely and, writhing as if from a blow to the stomach, began to sing through resentment and anger, there are no worse than us. It's time to close this madhouse. People shouldn't live. We all need to be destroyed. No, not individually, so that someone stays, but all at once. Only all at once, to press the button that is there, and solve this issue forever. Well, why are you staring at me with your round eyes? Come on, man, walk, chew your hodgepodge while they give you. It is true, you won't die from lard, you won't kill with lard. Did the pig know whose fat we ate? In the last words, the lieutenant's voice rose already with a haughty smirk. He said, the dead walk in twos. And shut up. The conversation that began with a smirk ended with the same, it is not clear why, born with an impressive emptiness. Alyosha only had time to feel in this emptiness that the stranger spoke to him as if he knew everything about him. He went outside, feeling like he was either deceived or a deceiver, and strode along the corridor, at every step honestly resurrecting in his memory the faces of the officers who had passed before his eyes over the years. The landfill was a place where everyone who handled weapons, as if performing a duty, was at least once a year. Not everyone could be remembered. Alyosha knew little about anyone, but he must have seen everyone close or far. In that series of faces from the past, faded, watery, as if disappointed by life, the face of a man from the officers' ward either did not appear, or floated from the past so unrecognizable that it had nothing to do with the original. Kolmogorov. Well, come on. At the very moment when he was walking with dirty foreign dishes along the corridor, which was still smooth and quiet in the morning, a jealous nervous cry was heard from the cabinet opened with a mousetrap. Institutov either squeamishly or timidly huddled on the threshold of his own office and himself held the door wide open, escorting out a small, but conspicuous by all his appearance, man. The uninvited guest, who did not even take off his hat in the room, seemed to be in distress. His face, in which there was something Tartar or wolf, froze in an irritated grimace. He was dressed with old-fashioned impressiveness. The hat, raincoat, boots, briefcase, clearly chosen like an ensemble, had a tobacco and, probably, once popular color. Another shirt, called white, and an orange tie with a colorful floral pattern in itself defiantly exotic. It is not clear for what occasion this men's kit, which was not at all camping, was intended and what happened to its owner in reality. But things must have been dragged around for many days without a shift. In the rough collar of the shirt, dirt was scraped up, as if under fingernails. The cloak dangled strangely on his shoulders, dull and scratched, like aluminum catering utensils. The citizen stubbornly prolonged his alien standing in the office and, moreover, looked indignantly at Institutov, as if demanding that he immediately leave the office himself. The commander lost his temper and shouted. That's it, I'm tired of repeating to you, you will see him in your beautiful capital. Not here and not now, that's all, period. In vain have you come and in vain muddy the waters, dear comrade. Today it will be sent. There won't be any dressing up or dressing up either, it's at home, do what you want. You are supposed to meet your son at the place of residence and not to stagger drunkenly around Karaganda. We are all going to die sometime. Anna will die, and you will see. But I personally don't cry, I don't throw tantrums. Believe me, you are now harming your son in any way possible. You just, excuse me, disgrace him. What do you want to wait for? To the police, to the sobering up station. So. The man silently bowed his head, so that the bald spot of his hat became visible, then with an unexpectedly sharp, authoritative movement, he raised his head, already looking with hostility at Alyosha, but did not answer anything. Soullessly, he simply staggered, as if someone had shoved him in the shoulder, went out and wandered along the echoing empty corridor of the infirmary to the exit. Me too, the shadow of Hamlet's father. Snorted the chief medical officer, and also in a hat. Then he energetically turned to Alyosha and said, nodding at the dirty dishes in his hands, well, my dear, leave that for today, there is more important work. You will go with me. Alyosha made no answer and did not move. Institutov, as he had done before, repeated his usual words, "Darling, the point is that it is in something else, that is, not in that." "Yes. Your business will wait, it will wait, but now, well, it's just an urgent matter. A matter of life and death. Darling, I can't do it today, even if I wanted to. In 3 days I'll try, I'll find time, and I'll take care of your tooth." "Not. Let's stop this conversation. We still have to work. It is also necessary to gather all the forces into a fist, to tighten up, to hoot. Well, if anything, whoever doesn't work for me doesn't drink champagne. I will not captivate, no barriers." As they say, good riddance. At these words, Kolmogorov suddenly, as he had been told, turned around and walked. The chief med caught himself and rushed after Alyosha. "That was a joke. I take my words back," shouted Institutov on the fly, jumping the ball over his shoulder. "My promise remains in force. Tomorrow you will have an eternal tooth." He finally managed to get ahead of and hold Kolmogorov, but he was deathly silent and looked over the galloping head of the chief medical officer into some distance. Institutov tried to grope, hit, drop, and squealed. "It's decided. Iron tooth, chrome-plated with titanium alloy, in 1 day, immediately, eternal, 100 years guarantee." "Well, my dear, in the end I asked for help. What will I say to Comrade Abdulov? Help, save my honest name in this difficult moment." "Well, let's keep our word." The chief med was writhing, only pretending to be weak, but he clung to Alyosha in earnest, with his tooth-pulling grip. For some reason he needed him more than ever. Alyosha could not let even a cat drown before his eyes. And to hear the plaintive calls of the chief medical officer about Abdulka was unbearable to tears. "But what will Comrade Abdulov say?" echoed loudly in his soul, as if it was his fatherly Abdulka himself who sat down in it to observe and urged the now doubting Alyosha. And if it were possible to answer him something, to explain, but it turned out that Abdulka would only know how he ungratefully fled from his gift. "What week are you promising?" Alyosha trembled. The chief medical officer instantly picked up cheerfully. Tomorrow everything will be done." "My dear, what nonsense is this? This is your resentment speaking. You have to be able to forgive. We all do a common thing. Give me just 1 day. Everything is ready with your tooth for a long time, it remains only to put it in place. Today you will help me, and tomorrow you will go home in the best possible way. Look, you insulted me, and I am ready to forgive everything, and I myself beg you not to make a fatal mistake. I beg you, young man, but I could not beg. Yes. I spend my labor, my personal material for prosthetics, and you impudently declare that I have something from someone. If you are hinting at the meat that Abdullah Ibrahimik forced me to accept as a gift, then I can inform you that I had nothing here either. I would have fucked if I hadn't done anything. And I did an examination, did an extraction, did all the preparation of the prosthesis, and am ready to finish your tooth tomorrow. And now, for the sake of a lovely tooth that will serve you for 100 years, and for the sake of Abdullah Ibrahimik, I, a person with an education above average, must humiliate myself and beg the young ungrateful impudent to endure just 1 day, word for word, and so everything inevitably returned to normal. It felt better, it was worth submitting again. And he calmed down, and found himself. And it did not turn out that he was forced, conquered by this man. It was he who forced himself and submitted to his own will, changing all his ardor to get ready for the journey this very hour for a promise that he would be released tomorrow. He, demobilized, had no other clothes, but he climbed into his dear overcoat, which over the years of service had withered to sandy redness. The overcoat, which had served its term of firmness, had a shabby appearance, which is why Alyosha again found a shabby look in it, but who looked from the outside, one might be surprised at the seriousness of his face and at what wax the serious dignity froze in him. Feeling under her faded rough skin the unaccustomed shell of the front tunic, Kolmogorov drew himself up involuntarily, but he did not understand that only his shabby red overcoat was visible to everyone. And all around in the emergency room of the infirmary, soldiers were swarming, doomed to something, some with a boil, some with a fresh wound, some with pain. All this crowd of people, as if they were confessing, were waiting for the appearance of the chief medical officer, and Alyosha was also waiting. He sensed that everyone who had gathered in the waiting room must have been swallowed up at any moment by disappointment, if not despair. The chief medical officer was leaving in an unknown direction on his own business, dooming them, too, to endure until tomorrow. And all around in the emergency room of the infirmary, soldiers were swarming, doomed to something, some with a boil, some with a fresh wound, some with pain. All this crowd of people, as if they were confessing, were waiting for the appearance of the chief medical officer, and Alyosha was also waiting. He sensed that everyone who had gathered in the waiting room must have been swallowed up at any moment by disappointment, if not despair. The chief medical officer was leaving in an unknown direction on his own business, dooming them, too, to endure until tomorrow. And all around in the emergency room of the infirmary, soldiers were swarming, doomed to something, some with a boil, some with a fresh wound, some with pain. All this crowd of people, as if they were confessing, were waiting for the appearance of the chief medical officer, and Alyosha was also waiting. He sensed that everyone who had gathered in the waiting room must have been swallowed up at any moment by disappointment, if not despair. The chief medical officer was leaving in an unknown direction on his own business, dooming them, too, to endure until tomorrow. That the journey was long was the only thing Alyosha knew from his own words. Institutov reported this with that confidential importance which, probably, should have replaced the worker's subsistence. But where to go, for how long, what to perform, left Alyosha indifferent. Whatever awaited, he was riveted to tomorrow, thinking deeply about his own, imagining more and more delightfully what a new and unlike anyone tomorrow will become. He will be a stranger to everyone tomorrow. He won't even recognize himself tomorrow. It seemed to Kolmogorov that this was destined for all people on earth, to always endure until tomorrow. That otherwise the real does not come if you do not endure. That this is even correct, fair, because only tomorrow can become a birthday, and not today, because you need to give time not to get rid of something, but to be born to something new in yourself. And in all the unfortunates who were languishing with their illnesses in the emergency room of the infirmary, waiting, like him, Institutov, Alyosha suddenly imagined the same brave universal turbidity as in some troubled water. He was delighted, and almost said aloud in joy, "Everything will happen tomorrow, tomorrow we will not recognize ourselves," Institutes declared. He glanced frantically at the crowded people, but did not catch anything in his eye that would inspire alarm, and exclaimed, "Today, my dears, I am Pain, not a doctor." He was no longer afraid for their lives, after which, as a medical worker, he courteously escorted the suffering beyond the threshold of the infirmary, until tomorrow. He looked around again to see if his path was clear. And he gave Alyosha a sign full of impatience. Near the infirmary, a car similar to a cow with swollen sides was grazing, chewing gasoline on the sly. It was the same ambulance, the only one in the regiment, in which Kolmogorov set off in the past, not yet knowing where he was being taken and what would happen to him. The other, strikingly unlike that naughty, merry chauffeur who had once taken him away from the regiment, sat dignifiedly at the steering wheel. Alyosha greeted him, but the guy did not respond to the greeting, did not even turn his head. In the back of the truck, Kolmogorov was now sitting as if on a perch, because the separate seat for the orderly, which he remembered, was gone. On the side, where it had once been, was attached a motionless board, worn down to a rotten lacquer darkness, so narrow that if do not cling with your hands, it was easy to slip off. In the aisle, a man-sized military field stretcher was spread, where someone had thrown an old thick woolen blanket, as if here, in the back of an ambulance, a very tired or indifferent person had just recently slept on a stretcher and wrapped himself in this blanket from the cold. "They drove me in this car." "That was before you," said Kolmogorov, thinking that the new driver would like such a conversation. "Fuck you," he suddenly responded with disgust, and Alyosha felt uneasy at the deaf and, as it were, aching voice. He could only see half of the stranger's face. I predatory, vigilantly looked at one point. The tightly closed lips made the mouth look like a seam. The gloomy man looked like a lizard, and, probably, like a lizard, he was resilient and agile, but not that strong. He also gloomily did not hear the urging of the chief. The car started off at his will, and so slowly, as if it was a motor ship leaving the shore, or on purpose he was so impudent to the chief medical officer. "Me too." "Still, life has taught you nothing, my dear," offended, threatened Institutov. "That's right, citizen chief." The guy got angry, to the beast, when life is taught. I would take it like that, and bang bang, right in the forehead. "What? Where are the firearms from?" The chief medical officer twitched in fright, but he came to his senses and became embarrassedly silent. However, the guy still could not restrain himself with another word to the chief medical officer, who aroused something evil in him. "Where did you come from, that you teach life, but you yourself live as you want? You better not bother me, I've become nervous in your infirmary, I've seen enough of everyone here. And then I'll blurt out something superfluous another time. After all, this is the very thing, making bad grades. Well, hush, hush, darling, they hear us, Institutov muttered. Hush, hush, mice are roaming, he muttered dully through his teeth and fell silent. We arrived unexpectedly quickly, so that even something became a pity. Institutov jumped out and disappeared into a silent, good-looking red brick building. Alyosha made out a checkpoint and double gates for entry and exit, with breastplates in the form of red stars. At the checkpoint it was deserted, as if everyone were hiding from the cold. 5 minutes passed and no one else entered the building or left it. The almost wild expanse of this place scattered by itself, airy, clean, washing, it seemed, uninhabited granite islands of palaces. Each stone house, 5 stories high, looked like a fortress or a palace. Such was the whole of Karaganda, a city built among the steppes. They built it, like draining the sea. Palaces, islands, fortresses, dams were blocked not by rivers, but by steppe-wide winds similar to rivers. Whatever the street, then the avenue, they lie heavily, straight ahead, and their span is long like that of bridges. Everyone here will shiver, remembering the house, and orphan will yearn for a shelter. Through the blurred glass, everything seemed small, placed in a glass jar. That's where the fate of people is decided, the guilty are looking for. But there is no accuracy. Who knows exactly who gets what and how much? And the prosecutor does not know, only pretends. If they knew, it would have been like in paradise for a long time, accuracy and peace, such chic communism. I do not believe. Damn him, this citizen prosecutor. The driver grumbled without turning around. I respect capital punishment only. Killed, so die. Death for death. And then, unexpectedly, with excitement, he objected to himself, wait, they need such a law, how come? People all stink. In jail for sure. Who is being jailed? If they were smart, or if they were strong at all, they would walk on the other side in white tailcoats. Who will declare or at least admit to himself what he did or thought? And they pretend that some smell like roses, while others seem to stink. They decide, bastards, who is in the flower garden and who is in the bucket. For one to be good it must be bad for others. What, profitable, was attached to the infirmary? Do you think that you will be treated in bed all your life? You are weak and stupid, or something. Or maybe it's punchy and smart like that. Alyosha was happy to report, I have served, tomorrow I will take the train and go home. In the infirmary, they still make a tooth for me, but I provided for the firing range at the firing range, I didn't lie down, you should not think so. My place was in the trenches, so few people know me. We provided shooting with Abdullah Ibrahimovich. You could say it's like being at war for 2 years. And he received a mocking response, but how, 80-80, we all come from there. They smoked marijuana, sniffed gunpowder, wound guts around their fists. Do you mean that we are countrymen? Countrymen, if found in cabbage. What vegetable garden are you from? How to call dignify? And, having heard the answer, he did not calm down. Well, Alexei, he gave me a loan, you sip. As for the priest, how, I ask, is the name? Alexei Mikhailovich Kolmogorov. Or well, hills and mountains, you are not my relative, but a horse in a coat, because I am registered in this world as Pal Palich. Have you learned it? This is how I named myself and depicted it in my passport next to my family portrait. It means that Pavel, Palich himself. Do you know what last name is? It is the very thing. They gave me a name, I did the rest for myself. Well, the good people once called Pasha on loan, but they didn't borrow it anymore. How is it? Alyosha shyly in front of the mysterious Pal Palich, who was born, it turned out, almost on his own. And so, he said, it means he decided, he did, but he didn't do what you want, die. Kolmogorov, hearing this, trembled, why die, with time you can do everything. That's why life, exists, there is little, the main thing is that it is alive. The driver got bored, who are you? What is life like? What to expect? One runs, wags his tail, nibbles on a piece that fell from the sky, and is happy, and when his hour comes, he rolls on the ground. And the other one? He will arrange everything for himself, and money, will not let himself be pitted, and will lie down in the ground in a new expensive suit. Everything can. He can die as his take. Real man. And then it's sickening to look, a Frerok is lying around with a hole in his head, but he wanted to live, I suppose, he was already squealing. I don't respect them. They want to live and will not do anything, they will not force anyone, they have nothing of their own, and so, name. Such and death gets some overwhelming. One that's like a rental. And he added, condescendingly, as if he trusted something important, death does not joke and you cannot joke with it. Everyone gets theirs only once. Death is such a risky and ace game. Win or die. Once I made a mistake or didn't get lucky, and forgive me, farewell. Everyone plays this game with everyone. The most interesting thing for me in this game is that for some reason, the vile ones win the most in it. There is no precision. Don't frown, profitable, don't frown, I won't bite off your nose. Do you think it's me who is the bastard? Win or die. Once I made a mistake or didn't get lucky, and forgive me, farewell. Everyone plays this game with everyone. The most interesting thing for me in this game is that for some reason, the vile ones win the most in it. There is no precision. Don't frown, profitable, don't frown, I won't bite off your nose. Do you think it's me who is the bastard? Win or die. Once I made a mistake or didn't get lucky, and forgive me, farewell. Everyone plays this game with everyone. The most interesting thing for me in this game is that for some reason, the vile ones win the most in it. There is no precision. Don't frown, profitable, don't frown, I won't bite off your nose. Do you think it's me who is the bastard? Alyosha did not have time to think anything, he grew up as if from under the ground of the institutes, taking him by surprise. There was a feeling that he crawled on all fours and suddenly straightened up, like a spring, to his full height. The chief medical officer's face was thoughtfully gloomy, lofty. Well, sir, one issue has been resolved. Pretty. He exclaimed in the silence. Please pay attention, I act at my own peril and risk, all alone, almost blindly. There is nowhere to wait for help, as always, they put everything on my shoulders. Well, okay, touch it, my dear. To the kingdom of the dead. Ha ha ha. To the house of sorrow and sorrow. There where we were not expected, but the meeting, ha ha, was appointed. Where there is death, there is life. The basement institution of the forensic medical examination met guests and those who were assigned to stay with the cordiality of a cellar. It was found in the backyards of a whitish clinical colossus in which something sick and weak had to flow like a liquid through the serpentine of various sized buildings in order to eventually recover and get stronger. Deserted identical entrances and exits, of which there were many, gaped with redness to serve in a fire and looked like dead ends. I had to circle in their labyrinth, shuffling a deck of the same visual images, asphalt, a street lamp, an entrance. Pal Palich patiently taxied on narrow short paths. The chief medical officer screamed several times, pushing him by the arm, I've passed. Come on, my dear. Stop, stop. Break. Institutov hesitantly climbed out and knocked on the booming iron door. He stood in front of her in the nakedness of loneliness, tensely stooped, his head firmly planted in an armored impenetrable torso, from where a strong tummy stood out from under the officer's cloak, greenish, but with a brown cockroach tint. The door opened, and a smooth rosy-cheeked snout poked its way through the gap, smilingly recognizing Comrade Chief Medical Officer. Institutov screwed up his face in disgust, and signaling to Pal Palich and Alyoshka to leave, he deftly dodged the obsequiously placed stigma. The door of the morgue was flung open already, revealing a bursting with strength, satiety and for some reason obsequious young healthy man. Welcome. The orderly sang sweetly towards the whole dull trinity. Have you come for your soldier? Are you going on your last journey? Institutov said, I will ask without overtures. I do not have much time. Yes, how many things are there with one thing, honestly? The orderly was surprised with all his heart. Do not even hesitate. We'll do everything in an instant. Do you have a coffin with a suit? Shall we marifet? You have a private shop here, but not with us. The commander was indignant loudly. We have our own rules, our own way of asking questions. How is it without a coffin? I don't understand, and who told you that you should understand something? It's none of your business. The orderly wilted, despondent, if so, sort it out yourself. So we'll figure it out, and without strangers. Escort my people to the place, and suddenly the chief medical officer loudly called the one he remembered all this time, Mukin Gennady Albertovich. He entered the examination on the 10th of November. The examination has been carried out. The papers from the prosecutor's office are all with me, so please kindly hand over the body immediately. Where are you going to put Mukin? The big man was still sad. We have everything that is required, the chief medical officer puffed up, and, probably wanting to inspire his frozen workers, called them with poetic delight like a leader, guys. Time does not wait. Pal Palich looked around as if looking for something to satisfy his hunger. Alyosha felt agitated and awkwardly picked up all the movements of his partner when he took up the stretcher, turning out to be not the leader, but the follower. The light dimmed, they stepped into a dark, dank hole, from the bottom of which someone dead was drawing in a draught, warmer and warmer. I had to bend over so as not to bruise my head on the pressing and rounded skull of the vault extending into the depths. The passage was only enough for one person, and two would not have dispersed. They descended, therefore, coupled, as if unwittingly, with each other. Nothing was heard behind Pal Palich. Beneath him, Alyosha felt a plank, springy flooring with some thresholds on which he unexpectedly stumbled, froze. The stretcher rested on Pal Palich, who was advancing ahead, and he angrily pushed them back. The bottom was already hard stone, echoing. Something was warm, mouldy, and responded vividly to every sound. The eye caught only the past tunnel in the gap, now it lifted up and it was clear how the accumulation of dust raised from the flooring stretched towards the daylight, over which the bright phantom of air easily hovered, that up there, it was cold and dry. But in a moment Kolmogorov found himself in the mortuary room, and he saw something that made his eyes froze. The entrance to this space opened like a hiding place. It seemed that part of the dusty wall had peeled off, exposing the yawning pale cold blue unsteadiness of the huge hall. The white-tiled walls and floors reflected the white incandescence of a deathly flat light that cut like glass. Kolmogorov had never seen the dead in his life, had never been to a funeral. The hall, lined from floor to ceiling with tiles, each of which, like a headlight, radiated its own blue-white light, half was empty in a businesslike way, for order, while the rest was condensed with withered waiting naked bodies, however, also in something in order. Some were lying on gurneys, one by one, some by two with a jack, some one on the other. There were about 20 such loaded gurneys. In the corner, a dump was already crawling onto the wall. Everything there was unloaded right on the floor, on a tarpaulin, and covered, like a cover, with a tarpaulin, but from the edge, where there was not enough tarpaulin, sticking out now a lonely hand, then logs of legs. Through the buzzing in his ears, Alyosha heard the importunate, Mukin. Mukin. And he saw, involuntarily turning around at this call, that 2 steps from him, so close, the chief medical officer was standing as if nothing had happened and... Pal Palich looked around in the morgue with the chill of a seasoned man, but also with curiosity. And, meeting Alyosha's gaze turned on himself, he immediately pointed somewhere with surprised eyes, silently drawing his attention to something in his own way. The horror had gone cold, his eyes had become accustomed to the faceless wax figures, but Kolmogorov moved his head around like a blind man and was surprised only by what he heard. Very close by, 2 voices croaked cheerfully, sonorously, quarreling like ravens in the midst of a chorus of voices, silent in concentration about their deaths. So much human nakedness made him think for some reason about the bathhouse. It seemed that the ice cream in this room had once let off steam from the sauna. But there, in the baths, where people screaming from everything as if from tickling, were naked from the steam, just like babies, it was blissfully easy without clothes. And here, none of these inanimate bodies could no longer feel that blissful lightness, and they were probably not people anymore. Alyosha began to feel surprisingly in the midst of their blatant nakedness, swaddled in an overcoat, and even in a uniform, and then the clothes on him suddenly became heavy with lead and it seemed disgusting that he was all covered, like a monkey, with red hair, red bouffant from the overcoat. Mukin. Mukin sounded again and again under the arches of this hall, where, however, there was no one to mourn. In the hall, their funeral team, like the relatives of the deceased, condolingly, was waiting for another orderly, whose big man who met them upstairs, it turned out, was on parcels. The uncle was in the prime of life and looked even healthier than his henchman. From under a white surgical cap, masking his otherwise bald head, his simple face, flattened by drunkenness, was adorned with courageous greyish sideburns. He must have heard through the chimney of the tunnel the conversations of his attorney with the chief medical officer and no longer hoped for something significant. Institutov instantly assumed the same sculptural pose, only contemptuously, twisting the overworked hands of the tooth puller into a knot, and began to contemptuously dictate to the second orderly his duties, demanding that the body of serviceman Mukin be handed over. But the magnanimous smile, revealing a row of snow-white teeth, similar to pig cartilage, never left the face of an elderly, sedate orderly. Feeling like a medical worker in a white surgical cap, he looked imperturbably at Institutov. So you say, Mukin. And there are no errors. Is he Mukin or not? This is important for us to make sure, because in this way, with a tip, you can fall into a mistake. Here's the cover sheet. That's what Mukin. Raised the voice of the institutes, but the owner of the ceremonial bust remained implacable for a long time. The document is, of course, good. And if Mukin is listed there in your document, then it is our task to give the body of the deceased to his relatives or comrades. But you, boss, are turning this problem into an equation with three unknowns. Unknown first, where is the coffin? Unknown second, who are our relatives? And thirdly, where is the respect for the dead? Here we all are the same as their death found them, but they didn't know about it, didn't preen, and where respect is, that's what we don't hear from you. A document is, of course, a document. It is important, of course, that the documents are correct. But after all, everyone here who comes here has a document, and they never took our people away from us in such a way. So I ask again, is this Mukin or not? Who are you to him? We usually give out the Mukins only to the Mukins. And then the Mukins will come to us tomorrow, they will say, issue them, both with respect, and rank after rank, and we will miss Kolyash, but only your document and we will find instead of their own person. Of course document. It is important, of course, that the documents are correct. But after all, everyone here who comes here has a document, and they never took our people away from us in such a way. So I ask again, is this Mukin or not? Who are you to him? We usually give out the Mukins only to the Mukins. And then the Mukins will come to us tomorrow, they will say, issue them, both with respect, and rank after rank, and we will miss Kolyash, but only your document and we will find instead of their own person. Of course document. It is important, of course, that the documents are correct. But after all, everyone here who comes here has a document, and they never took our people away from us in such a way. So I ask again, is this Mukin or not? Who are you to him? We usually give out the Mukins only to the Mukins. And then the Mukins will come to us tomorrow, they will say, issue them, both with respect, and rank after rank, and we will miss Kolyash, but only your document and we will find instead of their own person. Institutov cringed and fell silent, realizing that one would not take a voice here, and the arrogance in these people is the stronger, the louder they are blamed for their duties. The uncle, feeling that he had struck down the doctor, was also disappointed, because he still didn't get anything from it. The body had to be released. Okay, we're not greedy, the mortuary attendant couldn't stand this mortal boredom, and he said casually, as if about a lost thing in the lost and found office, let's look, we'll find it. And the two big men set to work. They silently began to examine the gurneys and entered their midst as if into water. The uncle was waist deep. He smoothly spread the gurneys with his hands, they silently blurred like boats, and looked expectantly into this dead water, transparent to himself, like a catcher. His partner did the same, but impatiently, without instinct. Those who passed the examination and were prepared for extradition were probably resting on gurneys. Each one was ripped open from the throat to the groin, like gutting a fish, but then sewn up, and this dead seemed gaped with an unhealed wound. It seemed that people were killed once again, prudently, ruthlessly, and now forever. And it was not disgust, but horror from what had been done to them that gave birth in the soul to something intrinsic, dear to every dead person. Kolmogorov timidly felt that he, too, was about to die, as everyone died, but at that moment an evil exclamation was heard from his partner, who, having caught the necessary tack, was for some reason bursting with either pride or surprise. Here he is. Mukin. The one, dear to every dead person. Kolmogorov timidly felt that he, too, was about to die, as everyone died, but at that moment an evil exclamation was heard from his partner, who, having caught the necessary tack, was for some reason bursting with either pride or surprise. Here he is. Mukin. The one, dear to every dead person. Kolmogorov timidly felt that he, too, was about to die, as everyone died, but at that moment an evil exclamation was heard from his partner, who, having caught the necessary tack, was for some reason bursting with either pride or surprise. Here he is. Mukin. The one. The orderlies escorted the gurney to an empty seat, and, with an impressive look, stepped aside, intending to take a look at what they would do without them now. Pal Palich hesitantly moved forward. We stopped with a stretcher near the gurney and again froze, not understanding how to proceed. Alyosha looked at the floor. Institutov fussed between them, chiming, "Come on, by the arms, by the legs." 1 and 2. Pal Palich grunted, "I won't do it without mittens." "Darling, what kind of whims?" "Responsibly, as a doctor, I declare that nothing threatens your health. And comrade nurses, as medical workers, will confirm. Nurses, maybe they get milk for harm. And I have no interest. I won't be without gloves." The chief medical officer called out in a suffering, evil voice, addressing no one knows to whom, as if he had lost his way, "Comrades, where can you get gloves? Are there qualified specialists here?" The elder grinned, not without malice, but took pity, pleased that they still could not do without him. Gloves appeared instantly. Kolmogorov and Pal Palich put the dead body on a stretcher and carried it to the dressing room. There, it turned out, there was a kind of narrow-gauge railway to pull up the mortal load. The elder, in his own way, called this device a corpse cart. The stretcher was fitted onto a gurney, similar in its stubbornness to a donkey. They suffered in the semi-darkness, setting her wheels into a rut. She kicked, as if she did not allow herself to be shod. "Well, what the hell is all around?" came the suffering voice of Institutov. "Where is the light? Shine, once you yell, only this will never work. There is no light here because they didn't do it, and why they didn't do it, no one will know this," the elder responded. "What do you want to see anyway? Here it is, everything that will not become wider from the light. Or do you need light for lighting to look under your feet? It is convenient, of course, it is nice to have a light bulb. But the problem is this, people roam back and forth. Snatched out of kindness or cocknut out of evil, just leave it. The light we have there and disappears, where people are. Well, at least stand with a candle. Are you going to stand here? Come on, and money, Kolyash and I will give up this place willingly and give up our penny for our labors, shine and guard. We are with him in everything for the convenience of life, and if we walk along these boards like blind men, we are always glad to see the light and walk with the light. Although you can hit your face in the dirt with the light, the main thing is that a person has in his soul. Well, at least stand with a candle. Are you going to stand here? Come on, and money, Kolyash and I will give up this place willingly and give up our penny for our labors, shine and guard. We are with him in everything for the convenience of life, and if we walk along these boards like blind men, we are always glad to see the light and walk with the light. Although you can hit your face in the dirt with the light, the main thing is that a person has in his soul. Well, at least stand with a candle. Are you going to stand here? Come on, and money, Kolyash and I will give up this place willingly and give up our penny for our labors, shine and guard. We are with him in everything for the convenience of life, and if we walk along these boards like blind men, we are always glad to see the light and walk with the light. Although you can hit your face in the dirt with the light, the main thing is that a person has in his soul. We started climbing the boardwalk, pushing the gurney in front of us angrily, squeezing each other, in a narrow tunnel, hurrying to escape from the tunnel, shuddering from the squeal of the wheels. It was stuffy, scary. But it did not last an eternity, as it might seem, but only a few muscularly palpable moments. The gurney was pushed with jerks. She rested on all four of her hooves. Every jerk, every moment was given by convulsive tension of all muscles. When they burst out into the light, into the air, they found themselves saving themselves, feeling such a sickening lightness, such weakness in their whole body, as if they had descended from heaven to earth. When the stretcher was loaded into the car, the elder scolded, "Fool, feet first. Load a person, not a log. We must respect him to go to the next world." Pal Palich sullenly obeyed. The stretcher was unrolled and shoved into the body as instructed by the orderly, turning away his eyes. When they managed and it was possible to drive off, Pal Palich suddenly refused to drive. His voice rang out resentfully, angrily, like a child's. And he, like a child, flared up in anger, shouting out to no one knows, well, where to go with such hands. The corpse was dragging, and now grabbed the steering wheel and go on a bright path. The orderlies looked at this riot with identical smiles, but took pity and led the servicemen to wash their hands. We went the same way. The elder led to an inconspicuous door, behind which was a cool deserted corridor, where the doors of all the local basements opened. We entered one of them and found ourselves in a well-groomed living room, with a TV, a refrigerator, curtains on the window, an old sofa and armchairs, but similar due to the abundance of outlandish tools and fixtures hung everywhere on the workshop. While they were washing their hands, the elder and his partner were usually preparing to drink and eat. Where is his coffin? Who buries him, Mukina? It seems like a serviceman, but why are you taking away like an ownerless? Kolyash and I thought we had put the defender of the homeland to rest. They thought they would throw a funeral, what kind of zeal would fall to us? Although the matter is clear that it is dark, they simply do not bring us for examination. Oh well, shut up, shut up. Let's at least remember the young man. Porna Gramulechka, the boss will not hear. Pal Palich recoiled, I will not drink for this. What? Familiar, the older one caught on. They are all familiar to me, he answered offendedly. I took all those acquaintances to your heap. Well, well, even to remember your own turn. Well then, at least chew, helmsman. Grab the sausage. Pal Palich took a step towards the table with dignity and took in his hands one round sausage, lying like a medal on a square of black bread. Alyosha swayed in her direction from the long-forgotten spirit of the sausage, but he could not take even a piece. Why are you smiling? Well, you have morals, you have become brutalized there in your society, how do you hate each other so much? What does the sausage have to do with it, for what? I don't like sausage, Kolmogorov said guiltily. And his words either amazed or horrified the orderlies. The youngest almost screamed in surprise, how can you live without sausage? Alyosha did not know what to answer, the eldest himself spoke insinuatingly, carefully, it's clear. And he can't look at living people. But do you think, what a terrible secret did you find out, did you get to the bottom of the roots? Here we are with Kolyasha and eat sausage and enjoy life, but why? Alive, so live. As long as we are alive, we will eat and drink, love and rejoice. I'll die, I'll end up on a pile, well, bear with me that I stink for a few days, well, forgive me for causing a little trouble. We have a resort. What, do you see the writhings or hear the cries with which they died? Silence, peace. And how many people, perhaps, prayed for death in order to get rid of torment? Well, look, they got rid of it. Turn your eyes back. Are you afraid of yourself or feel sorry for yourself? And don't be afraid, look at death with respect, with your soul. Life is terrible. And not the dead are terrible, but maybe when they were human. This death looks dirty, but inside it is clean as a tear. And in vain you, dear man, disdain to eat sausage. In it, there is no meaning to life, but it also exists, and once born into the world, it is obliged to eat at least out of respect and gratitude. Remember, Pal Palich took a few more pieces of sausage with a grin, do you mind? Then I will taste this meaning for him. I love smoked sausage, I remember. When they got out the same way into the air, he finished chewing the sausage and, as soon as the door of the morgue closed behind them, he informed Kolmogorov drunk, the family is a kulak, cunning. Rejoice, rejoice, they say, but for themselves, twice two is always four. With each blind man, they shear like a sheep, which is not to rejoice. Ryaki ate, also joyful. And they have vodka and smoked sausage. You learned that you refused, since they gave you. At least he mumbled what it is, with meaning, it tastes. Pal Palich again patiently taxied on narrow short paths. Already at the exit from the labyrinth, another ambulance almost passed by. The chief med yelled again, pushing him by the arm, darling, slow down. Stop, stop. That's the meeting. He opened the door and jumped out happily. From another sanitary rattletrap, which also stalled the course, came out, cordially stretching out his arms, an old good acquaintance, also a doctor in uniform. Paradise apples. An ambulance travelled around Karaganda. The chief medical officer hid on the front end, did not give a voice. Pal Palich, sitting at the wheel, deftly fenced himself off with his back. Alyosha alone carried out a service that was understandable only to himself. He tried, he sat on his perch with the posture of a sentry dog, who was entrusted with guarding, and in his head an annoyingly alien, restless surname was buzzing. The dead man stretched out spaciously on a stretcher. Two legs stuck out from under the woolen blanket. These legs themselves climbed into the eyes. In each of them, for some reason, just like that, separately, there was something indicating, strong, even imperious. Alyosha obeyed, staring without averting his eyes, so if they are drowning, if they are dragged away with a little head, then their hand is still jerked up convulsively from the leaden mortal water, And from under the mortal's blanket, which also looked like lead, as if from underwater, each of them stuck out separately, filled with a mortal scream. She, the leg, spreads out thick stumps of fingers that you can't grab onto anything, even if you want to. It seemed that it was death itself pointing out from under the matting of a soldier's blanket, and Kolmogorov was already cowardly clinging to his bench so as not to slip off. We've arrived. An important white ship, with 1,000, if not more, neat identical windows floated through the air, cutting through the cold crystal surface of the parks. This ship in its comfortable voyage was accompanied by a dozen white neat boats. Everything breathed peace and service, even behind each crystal chandelier of the tree there was, probably, a separate care. Air, and what air! What a charm! Exclaimed obsequiously the chief medical officer. At the booth, next to the massive gates moving apart in the manner of backstage, several controllers, tidy, like kids at a matinee, made them wait a long time. This delay inspired, you can get here only forgetting about your own importance, that this is the most important thing, to get permission to enter. Finally, one of the inspectors marched to the wretched ambulance. Pass. No, my dear, we are not from here, we have a business trip. Our private was seconded to your neurosurgery, and now it would be necessary to close his business trip and pick up his little things. Behind a corpse, or what? The controller asked bluntly. Institutov got worried. Sorry, for the little things, but last week we took away the body from you for a forensic medical examination. Today we have a ritual event, comrade, and this is a big difference if you, of course, understand what is at stake. The controller indifferently turned away and barked at the post. Vanya, the corpse truck has arrived, let it through. Institutov, when the car finally drove into the protected area, exploded with indignation. They gave a place at the gate in a medical institution, and already they feel like owners. Who are they, all these people without a medical education? Well, who, you ask? You dedicate your whole life to medicine so that in the end some bore who can't even write without mistakes will be in charge at the gate. With those words, he lonely and proudly thrust his head towards the light breeze and, blown by it, making a sound like snoring, absorbed the local air once or twice. The car slowly drove up to one of the white hospital boats, but he, in comparison with a provincial infirmary, was like a giant, having his own separate emerald garden. This building, surrounded by fruit trees already prepared for winter, hard-to-reach apple trees and cherries, met the arrival of the death load with such coolness and so aloof, as if it had not been created for such meetings at all. Institutov enthusiastically caught the healing air with his nostrils. They entered the cold light emergency room. Sitting on the couch, two nurses of valiant appearance were playing recklessly at giveaways, mocking the black and white knuckles of checkers, weighing cracks, kicking on the board, in order to only lose more quickly. When Institutov appeared, the fellows quickly calmed down. One of them quickly assessed a smallish man in a withered officer's coat and confidently blocked the way, asking a deliberately courteous question, "Do you speak English?" Sprechen Sie Deutsch? Parlez-vous de France? Institutov was upset, but he was just as courteous, although he probably understood that he had run into servants, who here consisted entirely of soldiers who were being treated. Darling, I'm going to the manager. The servant did not raise an eyebrow. Yes, Naturlich, speak, I am listening to you. Andy's tent. Fürstein, said the talkative fellow already defiantly calmly. I'm with the body, that is, with the case. If you allow, young people, this time, obviously, your immediate supervisor will be required, Institutov explained coldly, worried that the servant would not completely drop his authority. But the fellow just did not rush to answer. He was amazed and, turning not even to the chief medical officer, but to his partner, exclaimed, "Yes, you are fantastic. Georges, the auditor came to us." My friend responded rudely, displeasedly, "I have a lunch break, I won't go anywhere. I wanna eat." "Serge, go to the canteen, take yogurt. Antonina will give it to you, she likes you. And also a little white loaf, GGG. And I will visit Svetlanka, we will get some sugar. Svetka is rubbish, a dirty girl, she has become of a big opinion about herself, we can do without her sugar, let her suffer. Go to Antonina dear to my heart, say, I'm a fool, a blockhead, I want keffi and I'm ready to make you happy for this, mademoiselle. Well, what are you worth? You were clearly told, in Russian, come in, please, Emmanuel Abramovich is in his office, he is waiting for you right away. Goodbye, or Wiedersehen, adieu, how do, buenos dias, arrive Dutch. He was amazed and, turning not even to the chief medical officer, but to his partner, exclaimed, "Yes, you are fantastic. Georges, the auditor, came to us. My friend responded rudely, displeasedly, I have a lunch break, I won't go anywhere. I wanna eat. Serge, go to the canteen, take yogurt. Antonina will give it to you, she likes you. And also a little white loaf, GGG. And I will visit Svetlanka, we will get some sugar. Svetka is rubbish, a dirty girl, she has become of a big opinion about herself, we can do without her sugar, let her suffer. Go to Antonina dear to my heart, say, I'm a fool, a blockhead, I want keffi and I'm ready to make you happy for this, mademoiselle. Well, what are you worth? You were clearly told, in Russian, come in, please, Emmanuel Abramovich is in his office, he is waiting for you right away. Goodbye, or Wiedersehen, adieu, how do, buenos dias, arrivederci. He was amazed and, turning not even to the chief medical officer, but to his partner, exclaimed, yes, you are fantastic. Georges, the auditor, came to us. My friend responded rudely, displeasedly, I have a lunch break, I won't go anywhere. I wanna eat. Serge, go to the canteen, take yogurt. Antonina will give it to you, she likes you. And also a little white loaf, GGG. And I will visit Svetlanka, we will get some sugar. Svetka is rubbish, a dirty girl, she has become of a big opinion about herself, we can do without her sugar, let her suffer. Go to Antonina dear to my heart, say, I'm a fool, a blockhead, I want keffi and I'm ready to make you happy for this, mademoiselle. Well, what are you worth? You were clearly told, in Russian, come in, please, Emmanuel Abramovich is in his office, he is waiting for you right away. Goodbye, or Wiedersehen, adieu, how do, buenos dias, arrivederci, and to his partner, he exclaimed, yes, you are fantastic. Georges, the auditor, came to us. My friend responded rudely, displeasedly, I have a lunch break, I won't go anywhere. I wanna eat. Serge, go to the canteen, take yogurt. Antonina will give it to you, she likes you. And also a little white loaf, GGG. And I will visit Svetlanka, we will get some sugar. Svetka is rubbish, a dirty girl, she has become of a big opinion about herself, we can do without her sugar, let her suffer. Go to Antonina dear to my heart, say, I'm a fool, a blockhead, I want keffi and I'm ready to make you happy for this, mademoiselle. Well, what are you worth? You were clearly told, in Russian, come in, please, Emmanuel Abramovich is in his office, he is waiting for you right away. Goodbye, or Wiedersehen, adieu, how do, buenos dias, arrivederci, and to his partner, he exclaimed, yes, you are fantastic. Georges, the auditor, came to us. My friend responded rudely, displeasedly, I have a lunch break, I won't go anywhere. I wanna eat. Serge, go to the canteen, take yogurt. Antonina will give it to you, she likes you. And also a little white loaf, GGG. And I will visit Svetlanka, we will get some sugar. Svetka is rubbish, a dirty girl, she has become of a big opinion about herself, we can do without her sugar, let her suffer. Go to Antonina dear to my heart, say, I'm a fool, a blockhead, I want keffi and I'm ready to make you happy for this, mademoiselle. Well, what are you worth? You were clearly told, in Russian, come in, please, Emmanuel Abramovich is in his office, he is waiting for you right away. Goodbye, or Wiedersehen, adieu, how do, buenos dias, arrivederci. The friend responded rudely, displeasedly, I have a lunch break, I won't go anywhere. I wanna eat. Serge, go to the canteen, take yogurt. Antonina will give it to you, she likes you. And also a little white loaf, GGG. And I will visit Svetlanka, we will get some sugar. Svetka is rubbish, a dirty girl, she has become of a big opinion about herself, we can do without her sugar, let her suffer. Go to Antonina dear to my heart, say, I'm a fool, a blockhead, I want keffi and I'm ready to make you happy for this, mademoiselle. Well, what are you worth? You were clearly told, in Russian, come in, please, Emmanuel Abramovich is in his office, he is waiting for you right away. Goodbye, or Wiedersehen, adieu, how do, buenos dias, arrivederci. The friend responded rudely, displeasedly, I have a lunch break, I won't go anywhere. I wanna eat. Serge, go to the canteen, take yogurt. Antonina will give it to you, she likes you. And also a little white loaf, GGG. And I will visit Svetlanka, we will get some sugar. Svetka is rubbish, a dirty girl, she has become of a big opinion about herself, we can do without her sugar, let her suffer. Go to Antonina dear to my heart, say, I'm a fool, a blockhead, I want keffi and I'm ready to make you happy for this, mademoiselle. Well, what are you worth? You were clearly told, in Russian, come in, please, Emmanuel Abramovich is in his office, he is waiting for you right away. Goodbye, or Wiedersehen, adieu, how do, buenos dias, arrivederci. And also a little white loaf, GGG. And I will visit Svetlanka, we will get some sugar. Svetka is rubbish, a dirty girl, she has become of a big opinion about herself, we can do without her sugar, let her suffer. Go to Antonina dear to my heart, say, I'm a fool, a blockhead, I want keffi and I'm ready to make you happy for this, mademoiselle. Well, what are you worth? You were clearly told, in Russian, come in, please, Emmanuel Abramovich is in his office, he is waiting for you right away. Goodbye, or Wiedersehen, adieu, how do, buenos dias, arrivederci. And also a little white loaf, GGG. And I will visit Svetlanka, we will get some sugar. Svetka is rubbish, a dirty girl, she has become of a big opinion about herself, we can do without her sugar, let her suffer. Go to Antonina dear to my heart, say, I'm a fool, a blockhead, I want keffi and I'm ready to make you happy for this, mademoiselle. Well, what are you worth? You were clearly told, in Russian, come in, please, Emmanuel Abramovich is in his office, he is waiting for you right away. Goodbye, or Wiedersehen, adieu, how do, buenos dias, arrivederci. Well, what are you worth? You were clearly told, in Russian, come in, please, Emmanuel Abramovich is in his office, he is waiting for you right away. Goodbye, or Wiedersehen, adieu, how do, buenos dias, arrivederci. Well, what are you worth? You were clearly told, in Russian, come in, please, Emmanuel Abramovich is in his office, he is waiting for you right away. Goodbye, or Wiedersehen, adieu, how do, buenos dias, arrivederci. By the office with the sign head of the Department of Pathological Anatomy again sat two young fellows. It seemed that they were strikingly different from those others, because, having buried their noses in a thick medical book, they were doing nothing but cramming one of its chapters with an intelligent look. But the owner was not there. Institutov continued his search. Wandering around the department, they passed through the waiting rooms and again they met two good fellows, as if they had replaced those who were cramming a book at a locked office. This time the twins worked diligently, dressing the loose, mealy old body lying on a steel table in ashen grey, with gold shoulder straps, general's uniform. The procedure was coming to an end. The nurses were pulling trousers with stripes over the dry chicken legs of the deceased old man. When they found themselves in the hall, where, probably, farewell to the general was to take place soon, the good fellows were already in sight here, equalizing the rows of chairs in front of the pedestal for the coffin, deserving tearful affectionate glances from the relatives of the deceased. All this took place in a cozy, home-like room, where the floor was covered with a carpet, so that the sounds of footsteps were softly muffled, as if they were walking on it in slippers. Whirled from his wanderings and spiritual waltzing tension, Institutov floated freely in the local bluish ultraviolet air. In the end, they found themselves in a room where the floor and walls were tiled. It was obviously a mortuary room, but of sterile whiteness, carefully calculated, like everything else here, only for a few lying places. The concrete shops, both upper and lower, were empty. 8 washed concrete floors were fastened in 2 tiers to the walls. A free place near the wall with a small clean window was again occupied by a sparkling steel table, where everything was reflected as in a mirror. The good fellows that met everywhere outstripped their appearance, and now, in the middle of the mortuary, not noticing anything around them, they rushed like mad from wall to wall, kicking the shriveled boot that replaced the ball. Everything was visible. And no longer imagined. They were the same nurses who called each other in the emergency room Serge and Georges. It might seem that they kept up everywhere, hosting in a gigantic building, having invented either as a mockery or for the decency of some Emmanuel Abramovich. From the steamed running around mat bodies, naked to the waist, shivered with the sugary suffocating smell of the same cologne that soaked the fellows through and through, like a biscuit. Both of them, again, had their hair pulled back behind their ears in the same manner, lovingly slicked down and shiny with something greasy, like wax, so that their heads shone in the light like polished boots. The one in charge seemed to be younger than his partner. When one of the fellows heart-rendingly and voluptuously yelled, "Go all!" Institutions, whose presence was not noticed, announced loudly in a judicial way, "Set aside, football players. Stop fooling around. You will still explain your outrageous behavior to Emmanuel Abramovich. Do you have a conscience or not? The Karamazov brothers are also for me. I don't have much time. I do not intend to endure the goat games of 2 spoiled, impudent youths. The nurses went out, reluctantly put on hospital uniforms, the same ones that surgeons put on, probably wearing those blue operating blouses after doctors. One frowned expectantly, and the other, who was smaller and slimmer, coldly avoiding Institutov, replied, "We are not yours. Only Emmanuel Abramovich can order us, and you, comrade, must have fallen from the moon." "Comrade manager." "Emmanuel Abramovich," called the chief medical officer. The handsome young man was embarrassed and hurried to make amends. "Well, why shout? What are you so worried about? Now we are organizing everything." Silviapol, he looked impressively, affectionately at Institutov, and the chief medical officer unexpectedly also answered him with some kind of relaxed smile. "We are not yours. Only Emmanuel Abramovich can order us, and you, comrade, must have fallen from the moon." "Comrade manager." "Emmanuel Abramovich," called the chief medical officer. The handsome young man was embarrassed and hurried to make amends. "Well, why scream? What are you so worried about? Now we are organizing everything." Silviapol, he looked impressively, affectionately at Institutov, and the chief medical officer unexpectedly also answered him with some kind of relaxed smile. "We are not yours. Only Emmanuel Abramovich can order us, and you, comrade, must have fallen from the moon." "Comrade manager." "Emmanuel Abramovich," called the chief medical officer. The handsome young man was embarrassed and hurried to make amends. "Well, why shout? What are you so worried about? Now we are organizing everything." Silviapol, he looked impressively, affectionately at Institutov, and the chief medical officer unexpectedly also answered him with some kind of relaxed smile. A few minutes later, the handsome stately servant and the cockroach-like, pompous tooth-puller were imbued with such mutual affection that the two of them were already impressively ordering in the mortuary. "Sergei, my dear, we will need to bring in the body," gently, but also a little haughtily sounded the voice of the chief medical officer. "Don't worry and rest," the young man replied in a deep, languid baritone and, with a cat-like predatory gait, proceeded through the entire mortuary to unlock the back door, carrying, like an egg on a tray, a detached courageous face. With him was a bunch of keys, which was attached to the belt with a carabiner. Pavlov drove the ambulance to the back entrance. The corpse was brought in, still covered with a blanket, and dumped from the stretcher. The burden hit the mirrored surface of the table. Looking at his back swollen with mud with skinny shoulder blades sticking out like chicken wings, Serge cried out in surprise, "Our client. Wow, who would have thought? The fatherland has not forgotten its hero. What people? I remember, Georges and I are called to the Opa block. Intelligence reported, a fighter ditched on the battlefield. A stray bullet, with whom it does not happen. The surgeon's scalpel did not touch the hero's body. Doctors burned their own house, hooray. Hurrah! And the motherland generously gave birch juice. Ha, Jorik and I were in no hurry either. We, had Cupid with one of the local ladies. And so we culturally put on a hearse, we communicate culturally about culture, about literature, about beautiful ladies, we drove and drove. And suddenly the client arrives back. I am delighted, bravo. Jura, on what river did you float this log? Truly, I tell you, my naive keffi eater, there are rivers that flow backwards. The nurses were bursting and crushed with laughter. They grabbed each other as if they were clapping, their frisky, happy laughter splashed in the mortuary. As soon as Pavlov grunted sullenly, "You should lie here," rolled up, as the nurses, eyes bulging with delight, unable to say anything, began to beat in a new fit of laughter, probably vividly imagining this picture. Well, Private Mukin seems to have left an indelible mark on the memory of Sergei and Georgy, Institutov hastened to say, in the hope that the nurses would calm down. But there was another burst of laughter. "Shut up, well, you Merzilki. Or come on, I'll shed a tear. I like to look when they cry." Pavlov raised his voice. Serge immediately stopped laughing and threw a couple of phrases in the face of a stranger. "I tell for people with a sense of humor. What kind of flight this bird of yours is a manfly, and what a feat he accomplished there, Georges, and I do not care. Such Mukins are dying like flies, just a little, and the client is ready. Always ready." His partner answered with a hoarse name, but, interrupted for some reason by the vengeful look of his friend, he closed his mouth. "So our Mukin is your client," the chief medical officer said peacefully, wanting to flatter the hidden nurses. "Well, I don't know," Serge replied lazily. Silviapol, the chief med continued cautiously, "I love, of course, young jokes, enthusiasm, laughter." He himself was once young and also, so to speak, was not afraid of death. He was cheeky in her face. But, as Russian folk wisdom says, if you want to ride, know how to carry sleds. Enough, we laughed. It's time, my friends, to get to work. Get your client right. Work first. Georges shook his head like a stallion and yawned sweetly at the top of his lungs. We can't, we are still small, Serge said instead. He was offended, drew himself up in a dignified manner, and suddenly walked away. Institutov did not remain in confusion for long. Urged like a brute, a nurse wandered into the mortuary, an extinct, round-shouldered woman in a medical gown that hung like a bag, it seemed, sewn from burlap, on her shoulders. The nurse still looked offended, but could not resist and said behind her back, please love and favor. Just a rat. All in white. Manual. Well, what did you get up? Work. I mark the time, you set a world record. She turned and looked at her driver with devotion, ready for some reason to grant his every wish. Serge fearfully dodged her gaze. He got hold of a tape recorder somewhere, the body of which was wrapped all over with electrical tape, which made it look swollen, like a cheek with a flux. Sounds came from it, too, like a grinding of teeth. Suddenly he let out a scream, as if from a fit of pain, and achingly again he groaned, then howled, then gnashed. The nurses sat down on the bench, fascinated by the new toy. Serge jealously did not let go of the tape recorder, as if lulling. They purred something, dangled freely with their legs, sitting on a concrete bench as if on a swing, but they did not get tired. They laid down rhythmic fans. The nurse stared hungry, brightly in their direction and began to work, moving her hands like a sleepy one, holding a rubber hose in one and a rag in the other. Step back, otherwise I'll splatter you all, she said with care, looking just as innocently at strangers, as if they were superfluous here. But the fact that the water splashed, she was clearly pleased. She just wanted to draw attention to herself, to be needed. Though when looking at her, he involuntarily embraced shame for something. She could not yet be so old that they looked like an old woman, but her swollen cheeks, frail lips, protruding eyebrows, wrinkles, everything was an old woman. And even a flabby ingratiating voice. Having washed off imperceptibly half, she took up the other, wielding a hose and a rag. She tried, one rolled the dead body on her back, like a mannequin, although no one was looking in her direction, and, it seems, also out of an effort to please, cackled sympathetically loudly, oh, but it's not washed off here. Hands are black, well, like a black man. She washes the tan. I've never seen a tan, stupid. But a man-fly was sunbathing somewhere, basking in the sun. Serge exclaimed. Oh, what a beautiful face, I've never seen such a thing. I fell in love, rat. Do rats need love too? Serge cried with passion, catching her pitying glance tenaciously. Well, he's still a good guy, look how much gold he washed up. Would you marry someone like that, huh? Was it love at first sight or did you look after it for a long time? If only the man-flies knew, Georges clumsily picked up, stuttering, that girls fall in love with him. A rat fell in love with a fly. See, this is love, now they will merge in a kiss. Bravo! They have it, platonic, like Chapiv and Anka. Georges chuckled. Institutov objected with disgust. Comrade, the nurse is working, putting his soul into his work. What kind of jokes? It's fun that someone died, but they live, that she feels sorry for someone, but they don't feel sorry for anyone, Pavlov snapped, not hiding his eyes burning with dislike. This time, Serge paid no attention to the stranger, only the music screamed even louder, so that even their own laughter was torn apart in a metallic porcupine noise. Faggots! Pavlov barked. The nurses jumped briskly from the concrete bench and, cocked by the music that screamed from the tape recorder, bent and bared, like two angry monkeys, rushed into the fray. On their way, however, Institutov grew up, and here he revealed a special strength of his hands. With one hand he grabbed Serge, with the other, Georges, and pushed both so that the fellows, discouraged, found themselves again on the bench. Well, what would Emil Abramovich say? My dears, I don't understand, are you out of your mind? With the help of brute physical force and vile insults, only hardened criminals find out their relationship. Sorry, the chief medical officer said timidly. The tape recorder was straining, did not subside. The nurses, although thrown back into place, looked like owners from a concrete bench. Serge was staring, mockingly pretending to be in love, at the enemy, with that deliberateness, as if he had started a game. Pal Palich furiously glared at the laughing, cat-like impenetrable eyes, which were not at all embarrassed at the same time. The present, it seemed, was not even reflected in them. The nurse liked what was going on between them. Pal Palich began to feel a nasty shiver in his chest, as if a cold, slimy fat toad had climbed right into his soul. His eyes began to bulge with tension, and, against his will, it happened once or twice that he blinked, could not stand the simplest test in this game. And after each time, the nurse depicted a kiss with his lips. Pal Palich could not stand it, gave up, lowered his eyes. Serge continued to look at him. A completely alive and, it seemed, an outsider suddenly looked into the dead room, moderately well-fed, with well-groomed reddish hair and a silky beard blooming on a face full of love of life, and even intelligent eyes that understand everything. 2 ripe berries abundantly exuded the sweetness and light of the fruits of nature. Sergei. George. Boys, be quiet. Either scolded or exacted, already trying to disappear. An unexpected silence reigned, where the sound of water began to be heard. Serge and Georges stood still, almost at attention. Hello, Emmanuel Abramovich. The young man managed to sing in a pretty voice. Well, it's okay, it's not scary. The farewell has begun, just keep quiet. And he turned to all those present. Hello, comrades, farewell has begun, I would ask you not to make noise. Hello, exclaimed the chief medical officer in response. I'm very glad. Hello, the manager repeated without delay and willingly greeted each of those present separately, it seems even to the dead man that was reclining on the washing table in the midst of this worldly bustle. Hello. I am glad. Hello. Please accept my condolences. We started farewell, unfortunately, I cannot help, wait for your turn. Sergei, dear, follow the order. Comrade manager. Pleaded Institutov, just one question. Unfortunately, the parting has already begun, you will have to wait with your removal of the body, I can't help you with anything you can help. Some time ago, our private came to your balance sheet, the body is present here and now. So I take the body to my balance, but I still don't see little things. They were supposed to bring things to you, well, so to speak, what to wear on such an occasion. Things on the balance sheet where he served. Ceremonial uniform, tie, boots, all for a ritual event. You had a fatal outcome and you should be picked up as good as new. Sending to Moscow. At 00 hours 25 minutes. Procrastination, pardon the pun, is like death. I understand, colleague. Sergei, please give me elegant clothes if I'm not mistaken. Lovely words. Emmanuel Abramovich, you are my savior. After all, they were obliged to go to hell in the middle of nowhere for the coffin is on a different balance sheet. And the train will not wait either, be late even for a minute, and bye-bye, an empty place will arrive in the capital. Oh, what heartlessness we have around us, what bureaucracy. Well, is it rational? Everyone is in different places, but I'm alone. Imagine, I am a person with an above-average education, weighed down by medical knowledge, and I am doing God knows what instead of treating the sick, saving people's lives, doing good. Imagine what I deal with every day. In the infirmary, where it should be at least somehow sterile, they shit on every centimeter of the area. They steal everything they can eat. They ruin everything they touch. And these are just the most common mice. And after the recent events in the country, I just don't know what to live for, what to expect from the future. I think everything is going down the drain. The kindest person immediately sent Institutov his quiet sympathetic look. Well, what are you, colleague, you need to take care of yourself. There is no face on you. A medical worker is not a profession, it is a state of mind and body. However, I can say from personal experience that only communication with the beautiful can cure melancholy on this planet. And he wished, moving away, almost in a whisper, like children, goodbye, comrades, please keep silence. The manager disappeared in a cloud of personal warmth. For a moment there was an eerie silence in the basement. Hey, didn't you hear what was said? Running after things, fool. Schnell, Serge hissed at the nurse who didn't understand anything, who, on the sly, stealing time, tried to set a record to please him. GG clothes, KYKY rat. Georges suddenly choked, so that the tendons swelled like a bull on his neck. She timidly bent down, threw the hose on the floor, which still held her as if on a leash, forgetting the lathered rag in her other hand, and, beaten by their words, darted out of the mortuary. When she was gone, the fellows regained their calm and, as if nothing had happened, began to entertain themselves with chatter. It seemed as if they were still here only for fun. Third-party morning music seeped through the walls. Thick, muffled sounds wandered like shadows. The nurse appeared somehow imperceptibly. She herself looked like a restless shadow. Together with her appeared in the mortuary luggage in two thin pillowcases. Institutov grabbed a fatter bundle, shook out its contents onto a bare concrete bench, and froze. A soldier's tunic, faded to grey hair and worn out, the same grey, worthless trousers, fell out of the pillowcase. Everything had been washed by the laundress, but on the tunic a pale brown stain still showed through the chest. From another pillowcase, the institutes pulled out rattling soldiers' boots, on which sparks of blood were baked like burn spots. The chief medical officer threw away his blood-stained boots, clutched at his tunic and whimpered, clutching it in his hands, as if his own dead soul. How is this to be understood, comrades? Should have been dress uniform on their balance sheet. And understand, bummer, so Serge grinned. Everything is luster. Well, what have they come to? They will spoil themselves and they themselves will spoil again. Chief Med whimpered and whimpered, as if robbed. Murderers. Idiots. Such a thing in Moscow. But an insinuating, sympathetic voice rang out, well, there was a mistake, but who doesn't make mistakes? Everyone is wrong. Right a stone's throw from you, as I see, the beautiful Mumu is standing and silent. Take everything with him, use it, a full ceremonial set, but personally Georges and I will not tell anyone anything. Georges and I are not barbarians, he. He looked at Kolmogorov point blank and already ruthlessly, looking into his eyes with a chuckle, repeated, what are you staring at, little greedy man? The uniform is sports. Man is a friend to man, fulfill it. The chief med in amazement turned to Alyosha and immediately flopped down on his knees in front of him, wailing, Kolmogorov, my dear, save the day. Give. You'll get even better. Tomorrow we will go to this battalion and choose for yourself the best. He clutched at the skirts of his overcoat with a death grip, as if wanting to snatch at least a tuft of it for himself, and rocking Alyosha from side to side like a pillar. Take off your clothes, temper yourself, merry nurses sang along somewhere behind the chief medical officer. Well, what are you worth? Institutov kept on straining, hearing behind him, as if from somewhere above, only mocking greedy voices. Today you give it back, and tomorrow you get a new one, even better. Well, I can't take it off myself, but I'm ready, but it's all going to be sewn with white thread, Kolmogorov. Well, where can I get all the soldiers now? Where? And I myself will wash the boots myself. Well, think for yourself, is it possible to bury a soldier in my things? Don't you feel sorry for your friend? Think about what his father and mother will see their son in. Well, put yourself in their place, imagine that it is your mom and dad who see their son like this. Kolmogorov woke up and began to hand over one little thing to the delight of the chief medical officer. He picked them up piping hot and handed them to the nurse, so that she would immediately dress up the other. Alyosha was left without a shirt, and she was already buttoning up the buttons on the shirt of another, trying hard to put a tie over her head, and the green of her uniform soon hid everything under her. Kolmogorov, having given away his tunic, shirt, trousers, socks, boots, remained barefoot and in his underwear. Pal Palich turned away so as not to see anything. The chief medical officer did not turn his tongue to inform the undressed chilled boy that it was also impossible for him to remain in this form. Yes, don't be squeamish, young man, it's all clean, washed long ago. And I'll bring you shiny boots, even more beautiful than your boots. I have one, saved it right for you. And we'll make footcloths. You can use old waffle towels if you want it warmer, or I can pick it up softly from a sheet. The nurse suddenly remembered and darted out for shiny boots. Kolmogorov was touched by her kindred, warm voice, and he unquestioningly began to put on a mortal soldier's uniform. Well, now let's wrap ourselves in an overcoat, and everything will be just lovely. Cheered up the chief med, this is called cooking porridge from an axe. Well, what did I say? And now our boots are ripe. A happy, out of breath, nurse ran into the mortuary, clutching a really shiny, as if varnished, pair of outlandish boots to her breasts of a strange kind. Oh, she ran like crazy. Here, use it, young man, do not hesitate. The boots are new, look how shiny. Their officer played the trumpet in the orchestra. He played the box, not the trumpet. Surge through from the side. The woman flushed, and for the first time her pale, ugly face lit up with a blush. Don't trust him. He's all lying. She suddenly rushed into the attack, clutching her boots so tightly to her chest, as if she would not give it away for anything. That man recovered and left. And I forgot the boots. He had many of them. And I wore these when I played in the orchestra. Everything became new and unsteady. In the mortuary they waited out the long and long farewell of others, the echoes of which roamed around in shadows, now subdued and humble, now proud and rising like waves. The silence in which they wandered involuntarily became mournful, so that the nurses did not sit on the bench and, depicting this very grief, stood guard at Mukin, dressed in full dress, grimacing, "Farewell, Comrade General. Comrade General, we will never see you, let's forget." The chief of staff again felt uncomfortable with these games, and he tried to stop them. I think Emmanuel Abramovich would not like it. Young people, you are not in the circus after all. The nurses were only surprised, but returned to boredly incubate a concrete shop. Are we bothering anyone? No one sees anything. Serge asked with a surprised look, but the chief medical officer, thinking that he was mocking him again, was offendedly silent in response. The fellows instantly forgot, began to shove, measure their strength, pushing one another off the bench. At last the mournful music ceased. Institutov began to count impatiently minute by minute. Then the sound of a departing funeral procession was heard from the yard. Serge and Georges hid hostilely on the path, with all their appearance escorting away uninvited bored people. Pal Palich called Kolmogorov in an agitated voice for some reason. Even Institutov fussily tried to help put the mummer in a stretcher in order to disappear from this place as soon as possible. What barbarity, how inhuman it all is, but he suddenly faltered, looking at the black-caked hole in the dead forehead. Stop! He cried, and began frantically searching through the pockets of his cloak. With relief he found an ordinary medical plaster, split off a white adhesive strip and, with an unfeigned suffering look, covered the brown hole in the forehead of the deceased with it. Well, everything. My conscience is clear. I did everything in my power. When they had already taken up the burden, a nurse darted to Pal Palich and thrust a round, strong, weighty apple into the open pocket of his pea jacket, which she clutched in her hand like a cobblestone, and immediately ran away. Harnessed to a stretcher, her chosen one did not even feel in the confusion what had happened. Barbara was crying soundlessly away from him. She turned her head from side to side, looking into all the faces, and it seemed to her that she liked everything. But the nurses did not let her go beyond the threshold. They removed her with pokes from her eyes and disappeared into the same gap without saying anything, closing themselves from the inside, like animals. Finger boys. Playboys, laughers, lucky ones, damn them, Pal Palich conjured, without looking back. Who are in the tombs? Only a mother's womb is a person's God-given protection and shelter. And after, as from mother's womb into the world prepared for us, we skin ourselves, we all strive to hide back into the burrow. There is everything in the world for life, only her darling, mother's womb, no. Here in the womb a man is swaddled, but in the world is swaddled. So understand it. Birth, dear man, frees everything for us, starting with little hands. God did not create us free, but we all become swaddled because of the original sin. As if escaping from sin, we each begin to independently produce our own house, our own lair, our own lack of freedom, but there's no sense in it. Here it's already true, everything is the work of human hands, these very hands. Oh, sinful, damning hands. Our houses, alas, are not protection. Sunflowers are where every seed is evil. Jealous to envy for what? To someone else's house. Gnawing with each other where? In their homes, where nose to nose. The earth is huge and there is not enough space for people, everyone is choking on a piece. I heard that icons are hung in houses, that's all. It means that they should blame God later, even though they manage within their own four walls. God will punish, you think? Not at all. He is the creator, this is true, but how can a product be to blame for its manufacturer? At least this contraption, how can it be guilty before me, and what punishment will befall me from my hand? It will piss me off, I can't even burn it, because I didn't do it for myself, but for the grave. It doesn't belong, this product, to me from the second I drive the last nail into it. So is God, we no longer belong to him after Adam and Eve. After our freedom and sin. He had a son, he did it for himself, he only belonged to him. He suffered, poor, on the cross, Amar, how much he suffered, when the creator of the carnation drove the last ones into it for the perfection of human life. But did he drive us? No, dear man, something not made for himself is inaccessible to the hands of the creator. And no matter how much you put your soul into a product, you know where its end is. No matter how much you invest your soul, it will not be eternal if what you have invested in is not eternal. God, I believe, is made of the eternal material itself, not from such a board. But this is if you created yourself, then you can create 1,000 and 1,000,000 already similar to yourself eternal ones. But God, apparently, cannot create something similar to himself, because he himself does not own this secret and was not created by himself, but for us, for people. People, too, were created not for themselves, but for their children. Well, what is all this together for? I'm sorry, dear man, it's none of my business. I'll work mine. I'll make my own domina for rest, that's where I'll put my whole mortal soul, oh I'll put it. I'll smooth it out with Lachko, I'll cover everything softer, it's like snow from the inside, sleep, Pankratya Afansovich, sleep dear. God deprived me of having children, and so he decided my fate, that I, dear man, do not have children. Therefore, there are many free souls in me, I will decorate my house, it's the same as I ascend to paradise from happiness. And I will fly, and I will fly. When I feel that my death is near, I will get down to business. Not a coffin, honestly, but I will create wings. And who will envy? Nobody. What will worry? Nothing. The lid, like a door, will be closed behind me. They will leave one alone, and in a little country, in a dear grave, it's the same as in a mother, in a womb. Something will happen to a person after death, but only not hell and not heaven, and the Lord will not breathe in a new soul instead of the one that is gave warmly. Maybe, to another creator we depart at the hour of death, dear man, to the one who does not plan out of the flesh, the carpenter, but creates from the dust. Whoever breathes something into the dust is already another our creator, as there is another. That is not a carpenter, but a herbalist, I understand, because only grass grows from the grave hills. What is the grass for? Grass for everything is medicine, and food, and shelter, and just living life. Here he, the herbalist, I suppose, decides who should be what kind of grass, and who should be fed to the worms and devils. The artisan, heroic manners, a bearded, impressive grandfather, with a large round forehead that even swallowed his hair to the very top, which seemed to form another forehead in their place, argued incessantly, hugging lovingly healthy broad-shouldered coffins that were a head taller than him,